Sidekick Prince. Chapter 1. The Prince's Regression. Drip, drip drip, the blood flowing down from his fingers blossomed into red flowers on the white snow. Renato pressed his blood-stained hand against his stomach covered with dark red blood. Renato clenched his teeth, swallowing the blood surging up in his throat. His mouth was filled with a pungent smell. Searched thoroughly, someone shouted from afar. Startled by the sound of the hounds barking, Renato's shoulders flinched. He then could hear several voices. They were pursuers. "I see footprints over there. Chase him, he couldn't have gotten far." Voices full of malice pierced his eardrums. Renato stared at the blue light visible through the snowstorm and bit his lower lip. "A little more, I just need to go a little further." Renato held firm onto his last string of reason and forced his staggering body. "It's okay." He had already sent the horse that came together with him this far to the other side. He also threw away his shoes and necklace just in case, so he wouldn't be caught right away. Renato calmed himself down and moved his feet. Woof woof. As Renato had expected, the pursuers' voices became distant again. Fortunately, his trick worked. Grasping the situation, Renato diligently moved on. Before the pursuers could realize his trick, he had to enter the imperial tomb. However, after just a few more steps, he collapsed. Cough. A dry cough leaked out from his chapped, torn lips, and dark red blood splattered over the pure white snow. Renato felt his vision getting blurry and strained his eyes. A blue light flashed across his hazy vision. Cough, Renato coughed up blood again and touched the ground with his hands which had become frozen in the fierce snow. His stamina had long since run out. His wounded body had now reached its limit. But his mind was clear. The thought that he couldn't be any more miserable now drove Renato forward. He crawled towards the blue shining barrier. "Whether I'm caught here or not, I'll die anyway." Renato could sense his death. Even if he reached the imperial tomb, he would not be able to live. That hope had been abandoned a long time ago. Nevertheless, the reason he was heading there was to find a place to die. Because he had been swayed by others all his life, he wanted to at least decide the place where he would die. The prince is over there. Catch him, don't let him enter the imperial tomb. When Renato arrived in front of the barrier, he could hear the shouts again. "You are late." Hearing the shouts of the pursuers who discovered him and the barking of the hounds, Renato faintly smiled. And without delay, he stretched out his hand. As soon as his blood-soaked hand touched the blue shiny pattern, an invisible shock fiercely struck his head. Renato, unable to overcome his vision changing and his body twisting, retched. When he opened his eyes again, the world around him had completely changed. Ha, I succeeded. Renato burst into laughter as he saw the beautiful scenery unfolding in front of his eyes. The burial ground where the emperors and empresses of all eras, as well as numerous imperial family members listed on the imperial genealogy, were resting, was completely different from the fierce snowstorm outside. Perhaps the word, flower garden, was more appropriate to describe this place than burial ground. Quote exclamation mark quote. When glancing around helplessly, Renato realized the pure white altar in the distance. He recognized the identity of the altar at a glance. It was the tombs of the first emperor and the fairy king who loved him. How? Facing an unexpected situation, Renato muttered with a perplexed face. Although his purpose was to enter the imperial tomb, he did not know that he would come to the place where the first emperor and fairy king were sleeping. "Where is the prince?" Your Majesty." Renato, staring blankly at the altar, was awakened by a voice he heard from behind. It seemed like that man, Maximo, was chasing after him. However, he could only hear Maximo's voice and couldn't see the man. It was a natural thing, because that man wasn't a legitimate heir recognized by the fairy king. "My apologies, Your Majesty. The prince has fled to the imperial tomb." "You incompetent bastards." Blocked by the barrier, Maximo was raging mad. As Renato heard the voice filled with anger, he burst into laughter, thinking that man deserved that. Maximo, who became the emperor but was not recognized by the fairy king, would be unable to enter the imperial tomb even if he died and was resurrected again. "Find a way no matter what. Just find one. No, just break the barrier right now. Pardon, whether you use magic or set fire to it, just break this fucking barrier." Your Majesty, please calm down. I'm going to call a forest guardian right now. If there is a forest guardian, the barrier would. Who knows when a forest guardian will come? Just set it on fire. We won't be able to break the barrier with just a fire. Above all, this is the Fairy King's. Shut up, who cares about that damn Fairy King? I am the Emperor of this country. Maximo shouted in a voice filled with madness. Even without looking at him, Renato could guess what kind of expression the man was having on his face. Crazy jerk. Renato staggered up, leaving Maximo's voice behind. Facing the tomb of the Fairy King, he remembered what he wanted to do before he died. Renato barely arrived in front of the altar and sat down like a doll whose thread was cut. A gust of wind made the pocket watch in Renato's chest pocket fall to the floor. His body felt heavy. Renato gasped, feeling his death approaching. His breathing became heavy, and his vision blurred as if a fog was surrounding him. His gaze turned to the broken pocket watch. I have to give this back, though. Collapsing in front of the Fairy King's tomb, Renato murmured in a faint voice. His shaky hands held the broken pocket watch dearly. A sharp piece of glass dug into his palm, but strangely, it didn't hurt. Thank you. If this watch hadn't blocked Maximo's sword, he would have died without being able to make it this far. Renato held the blood-stained pocket watch in his arms and whispered an unreachable word of gratitude. And he then apologized. I'm sorry, I don't think I can return it to you. Renato tearfully whispered. He had no regrets in life, but the fact that he couldn't keep the promise to the watch's owner made him feel troubled. Oh nature itself, the Fairy King. Renato gathered all his remaining strength and stretched out his hand toward the altar. His red-dyed hand touched the pure white altar. I have, something, I want to ask you. Dark red blood splattered on the clean, spotless altar. Renato continued his words with a stutter. Now, he couldn't even move his tongue well. The people, that I love, have they safely come back to nature? They, don't feel, pain there anymore, right? The Fairy King was nature itself. When his companion, the first emperor, passed away, he chose to fall asleep together with him. Before falling into a deep sleep, the Fairy King blessed the children that inherited the bloodline from him and his companion. The ones inheriting that blood were the imperial family members of the empire. Therefore, to the people of the empire, the land was the bosom of the Fairy King. In particular, the imperial tomb was a special place in the empire. This was because, even after several hundred years had passed, the protection of the Fairy King still remained in this place. Thus, when an imperial family member died, they would be buried in the imperial tomb. They would then return to nature and receive eternal rest in the arms of the Fairy King. That was why he wanted to ask. He wanted to know if the people whom he loved more than his own life but couldn't protect, who had suffered and struggled their entire lives, could forget all the pain and were at peace in the arms of the Fairy King. Only with that could he comfortably close his eyes. Renato leaned his forehead on the silent altar and let out a weary breath. As expected, there was no answer. Just what did I even expect? Renato looked at the quiet altar with a bitter smile. If the Fairy King was going to answer his question, something would have already changed back when he begged while grasping at straws, when he cried out to wish that Ludmilla would survive, and when he prayed earnestly to protect Trudy. However, the Fairy King never responded to Renato's appeal. Back then, and now. Staring resentfully at the altar that remained silent till the end, Renato coughed and convulsed. A lump of dark red blood poured out from his gaping lips. I wish this kind of blood, didn't continue. Renato lamented as if crying and laughing at the same time. Transparent tears streamed down from his eyes, which had lost their light and become hazy. Together with him, his eyelids lost their strength and fell down. Swoosh. The moment the last direct imperial family member of the empire closed his eyes, the altar soaked in his blood began to glow belatedly. A gust of wind blew over, and the silent tomb shook like a person crying. A bunch of flowers, which was wrapping around the altar as if to protect it, scattered and fell like tears on his cold body. Open corner bracket I'm sorry. Close corner bracket. Who is there? While sinking into the endless darkness, Renato moved his lips when hearing someone apologize to him. But his voice couldn't come out. Open corner bracket I'm really sorry. Close corner bracket. A sad voice rang in his ears. The voice continued to apologize to Renato. A warmth similar to that of the sun wrapped around his stiff body. It's warm. Just before he stopped breathing, Renato felt soft energy like a spring breeze touching his eyes. His tear-soaked eyelids slightly trembled at the longing and tender feeling. He wanted to confirm the owner of the voice, but he had no strength to open his eyes. Soon, drowsiness rushed in like a tide. With that, Renato fell into a sleep that he could never wake up from again. But the rest he had hoped for did not come. Renato woke up again 6 years ago, on the day his world collapsed. Chapter 2. One night, when the moon and stars were hiding behind the clouds, the dark bedroom without a single light was quiet as if submerged in water. Then, in the quiet room where even the slightest sound of breathing was not heard, a sudden gust of wind blew in, breaking its silence. The window rattled and shook because of the unexpectedly strong wind, then burst open. Through it, the humid night air flowed inside. The moon, which had hidden behind the clouds, reappeared, and as soon as the moonlight fell in the dark room, a faint groaning sound came from the bed covered with curtains. A painful groan leaked out from the lips of the person who was quietly asleep. His neat and fine brows furrowed, his tightly closed eyelids twitching. Renato, the owner of the room, whimpered intermittently as if he was having a terrible nightmare. Then he gasped and opened his eyes. Coming to his senses, Renato breathed out heavily, blinking his eyes. The ceiling in his blurry vision was somehow familiar. What happened? Renato opened his mouth in bewilderment because he couldn't believe he could open his eyes once again. His hand gripping the blanket crawled up and stopped at his left chest. Thump thump, he could feel his heart beating loudly through the soft silk sleeping gown. I'm alive, Renato muttered in disbelief. He definitely died just a while ago. He also clearly remembered the moment when he stopped breathing. So why was he lying here now? Just what? When he got up to grasp the situation, a terrible pain rushed in. Renato curled his body up and grabbed his throbbing stomach. Somewhere between his waist and his stomach was hot as if on fire. It was the place where he was stabbed by Maximo's sword. Checking the wound with his trembling hands, Renato was puzzled. The feeling of the skin on the tip of his finger was strange. The wound that was profusely bleeding just a little while ago was now cleanly healed, and newly formed flesh had sprouted. How much time has passed? Renato's face became serious. The wound pierced by a sword could not have healed in just a day or two. Just as he was in extreme confusion, he felt someone outside the door. Your Imperial Highness. Renato's body stiffened because of the familiar voice. When he saw the attendant opening the door and coming in, his eyes widened. Louis, the person that appeared with a small lantern, was someone Renato was familiar with. But he was also someone who couldn't have existed now. How can you be here? Renato looked at Louis standing by the door and trembled as if he had seen a ghost. No, ghost was perhaps an accurate word, because Louis had passed away half a year ago. Your Imperial Highness, please don't cry, I'm okay. Renato recalled the sight of Louis, who said he was okay even at the moment of his death, and let out a suffocated sound. Meanwhile, Louis approached and looked at Renato with a worried expression. What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare? My goodness, look at your cold sweat. Are you sick? Renato grabbed Louis's wrist before it could touch his face. Surprised by the sudden action, Louis widened his eyes. Your Imperial Highness. How are you still alive? Grabbing Louis's wrist, Renato asked with a blank expression. The man's wrist was warm. His body temperature and his touch were too vivid to be called a dream. You obviously died, right in front of me. What does that mean? I died. Hearing Renato's murmuring, Louis asked back as if he had heard something ridiculous. Then he saw Renato's face exposed by the light and shut his mouth. Renato looked like he was about to cry. At that moment, Luna, sensing the strange atmosphere, entered. What's wrong, Louis? Luna. Louis's face brightened when seeing reinforcement. Renato also looked up. He glanced at the neat Luna without a single cut on her face and opened his mouth dumbfoundedly. Your Imperial Highness, I will buy time. In the meantime, please take Snow and run away. As far as possible. Do you understand? Luna, you too. I can't go. No, go with me. Luna, I beg of you, please live, Your Imperial Highness. You must survive. The last time he saw her was when she helped him escape with a blood-soaked face and an expression that showed her readiness to die. Renato got up while staggering and hugged Luna, tears streaming down his face. Luna, Luna. Your Imperial Highness, do you have any injuries? Excuse me. Seeing Renato suddenly hug her and ask a strange question, Luna looked at Louis to ask what the hell was going on. Louis shrugged his shoulders with an expression saying he didn't understand what was happening either. After exchanging glances with Louis, Luna came to a conclusion without difficulty. Your Imperial Highness, You had a nightmare. Right, nightmare. Hearing Luna's words, Renato paused. Was that a nightmare? Were Louis and Luna's deaths just nightmares? If this moment was real, then those moments would be nightmares. But the pain in his stomach, stabbed by Maximo's sword, was still there. Renato groped the area around the wound where intense heat was rising. As long as this pain existed, Renato couldn't dismiss what happened to him as a dream. Even so, he couldn't deny Luna and Louis who were in front of him right now either. Is it because today is the last day of Her Highness, the Imperial Consort's funeral? Luna tried to guess why Renato was acting strangely. Hearing her question, Renato's body stiffened. Imperial Consort? Did you just say Imperial Consort? You mean Ludmilla Nim? Yes, today is the 7th day since Ludmilla Nim passed away. You skipped meals all this week and stayed in the bedroom crying. A deep sadness lingered on Luna's face as she looked at Renato's complexion. After Ludmilla, who had been bedridden for a long time, passed away, Renato locked himself up in his bedroom and never went out. Because of that, she and Louis were so anxious. When she recalled what happened in the last week, Luna's expression became noticeably dark. Ludmilla Nim's funeral. Renato pondered over what he just heard with a blank face. Soon, his eyes shook violently. Your Imperial Highness. Momentarily losing strength in his legs, Renato stumbled. He probably would have slumped down on the floor if Luna had not supported him quickly. Are you okay? Should I call the palace doctors? No, it's nothing. The fact that dead people came back to life and moved in front of him was already a miracle by itself, but today was also the funeral day of someone who had passed away a long time ago. Renato felt his mind go blank. His brain was scrambled up like a tangled thread. Luna, what day is it today? No, what year is it now? Renato managed to pull himself together and ask the question he had been pondering for a while. First of all, he needed to understand this situation. Pardon, today is December 13th, year 628 of the imperial calendar. December 13th, Luna calmly answered Renato's question even though it was a little out of the ordinary. Renato recited the year and date she had given him. December 13th, year 628 of the imperial calendar. It was definitely the date when he was stabbed by Maximo's sword and went to the imperial tomb. But the year was different. The year he remembered was the year 634 of the imperial calendar. Realizing that there was a 6-year gap between his last memory and the present, Renato bit his lower lip. If this was truly reality, not a dream or a recollection before his death. Is today the last day of Ludmilla Nim's funeral? Yes, sir. The ritual will be held in the morning. On this day 6 years ago, he did not attend Ludmilla's funeral until the very end. No, he couldn't attend. At that time, Renato was afraid of the Empress and Marquis Metis, and the truth that he couldn't reveal. Eventually, he ran away because he did not have the courage to accept the terrible reality. But now, it was different. He didn't know exactly what happened to him, but he couldn't miss this second chance. Renato gave strength to his shaky toes and stood up straight. I have to go to the funeral. Excuse me. Hearing his unexpected declaration, both Louis and Luna opened their eyes wide at the same time. Renato looked at the twins who resembled each other even in their facial expressions and faintly smiled. Then, he ordered in a voice with a slight tremor. Let us get ready now. A rain of flowers fell on the coffin carrying the deceased. Renato watched one by one as the flowers of the mourners fell on Ludmilla's coffin. He was skeptical until he went to the funeral with the help of Louis and Luna, but when he arrived and watched the ritual, he realized that it was not a dream. This was neither a nightmare nor a recollection of memories before death, but a terrible reality. I didn't know that His Imperial Highness would attend the ritual. Didn't His Majesty the Empress send him? Shish, be quiet, he will hear you. Renato ignored all the gazes that were pouring on him and the gossip that flowed into his ears. He didn't have time to worry about that now. His gaze was nailed to Ludmilla's coffin. Ludmilla Nim. Renato recalled the one that was in eternal rest by now and lightly bit his lower lip. He felt something hot rising and trembling in his chest, and his eyes became wet. He watched the ritual, struggling to swallow the weeping sounds that welled up in his throat. He didn't even deserve to cry over her death. Chapter 3. The ritual wishing for the deceased to return to nature was held in a reverent atmosphere. As it was the funeral of the imperial consort, most of the mourners were each occupying a position in the empire. The mourners, regardless of age or gender, wore black veils and prayed for the soul of the deceased. It was not to show the grieving appearance to the deceased. However, there were only a few among them who sincerely mourned Ludmila's death. As she was originally from the clan of Forest Guardians, she had no ties to the Empire and only had a few close people during her lifetime. The only people who truly mourned Ludmila's death at this place were her son Trudy, the people of the Imperial Consort's palace, and Renato. Trudy. Renato's gaze turned to his half-brother who was standing next to Ludmila's coffin and shedding his tears. Hick, Imperial Mother. Looking at the child who was crying as if his world had collapsed, his heart became heavy. Renato bit the inner of his mouth to hold back the weeping sounds that almost escaped from his lips. A faint voice resounded in his head. Renato, I'm sorry to put a heavy burden on you, but I entrust Trudy to you. Please protect that child. Protecting Trudy. It was the will that Ludmila left to Renato when she sensed her own death. But Renato couldn't keep her last request. As a deformed beta prince who was ignored by everyone, he had no power to protect Trudy. No, that was a cowardly excuse. He made no effort to protect Trudy. He was scared and busy hiding. Renato acknowledged his own cowardice and incompetence. He didn't fail to protect Trudy, he just turned away from that. Your Imperial Highness, Prince Renato L. Floret, please decorate the final road of Her Highness the Imperial Consort. Is it my turn already? Renato snapped out of his heavy thoughts when the forest guarding priest called out to him, and slowly got up. Oh, the soul that was born of nature and now has returned to nature. May you rest peacefully in the arms of the Fairy King. His hands and feet trembled as he stood in front of the coffin covered with flowers. Renato managed to say his final farewell, and gently placed the flower in his hand on top of Ludmila's coffin. I'm glad I'm wearing a veil. Renato bit his lower lip and felt his vision become blurry. Had it not been for the veil covering his face, people would have seen the tears running down his cheeks. Hoo! Renato took a step back from Ludmila's coffin, exhaling a breath that he had been holding back. He couldn't stop shaking. Feeling anxious and restless, he habitually fumbled around the solar plexus area. However, he couldn't find the thing he was supposed to catch. Renato was momentarily puzzled but then exclaimed, "Ah," in a small voice. He realized that it couldn't be with him right now. It was a natural thing. Because it was only a long time later did he have it. Do you perhaps need my help? As he thought about the thing he no longer had, a voice naturally came to his mind. The owner of that thing was a little blunt, but also gentle in everything. I will give you this watch as a token of my promise. It's my mother's keepsake. This is something that I value more than my life. Something so precious. Please make sure to carry it with you. It has a powerful protective spell on it, so it will save your Imperial Highness from danger at least once. Please take good care of it and return it to me on the day I fulfill my promise to you. What that person said was true. In fact, the watch he gave Renato saved his life. Had it not been for the protective spell on the watch, he would not have been able to make it to the Imperial tomb, and right at that spot, in the hands of Maximo. With this, Her Highness, the Imperial Consort Ludmila Bloom Floret is ready to return to nature. Everyone, please stand up. Renato stopped his thoughts when he heard the priest's announcement of the end of the ritual. Having escaped from the dull recollection, he stared at Ludmila's coffin buried in a bunch of pure white flowers. The ritual of sending off and blessing the deceased by scattering flowers over the coffin ended with the eldest or highest-ranking member of the direct family decorating the last flower. Originally, the emperor or empress would have placed the last flowers, but neither attended the funeral. As a result, Renato became the highest-ranking person in this ritual. So they don't come in the end. Renato slightly turned his head and looked around the funeral hall. Things didn't seem to have changed from his previous life except that he attended Ludmila's funeral. It seems like His Majesty the Emperor did not come until the end. I thought he was going to be here on the last day. If he is not well enough to the extent of being unable to see the end of the person he loves, what will happen in the future? Since this has happened, wouldn't the young Lord of Florence Duchy have an advantage? His Imperial Highness, Prince Trudy is still young. People quarreled among themselves over the fact that the Emperor and the Empress did not attend the ritual. It was not surprising that the Empress did not come, but the fact that the Emperor did not attend either was indeed a shock. I heard rumors that he has not woken up ever since he collapsed a few days ago. They say that he is suffering from insanity because he cannot accept the death of Her Highness. Renato sighed as he heard people around him talking. The Emperor stayed with Trudy until the third day of the funeral, but he did not appear on the fourth day. He couldn't overcome the sadness and shock of losing Ludmila. In fact, the emperor was already suffering from severe aftereffects of an injury he had sustained several years ago. As his weakened body deteriorated, he could not withstand the shock of losing a loved one, making his condition worse. Then, 2 years later, the emperor, unable to overcome another loss that he had to face, finally died. At least, that was the future that Renato remembered. Future. Renato's expression clouded over when the horrific memories came to his mind. In the present situation, he could assume two things. Either he had a prophetic dream, or he had returned to the past. Renato thought it was the latter. The scar on his body could not be explained otherwise. He gently wrapped his hand around his still throbbing side. Open corner bracket I'm sorry. Close corner bracket. Another reason that made Renato think he had returned to the past was the voice he heard just before his death. A voice that sounded like a soft wind, or a sad melody. The warmth just like a spring breeze embraced his body. And he opened his eyes to the past, 6 years ago. What if the owner of that voice was the Fairy King? If he, the ruler of nature, had made a miracle to turn back time, the situation right now could be explained. Your Imperial Highness, Prince Trudy L. Fleuret, please come here. Please give your final farewell to Her Highness. Lost in thought, Renato was startled by the voice of the priest calling for Trudy, and his shoulders stiffened. Trudy, who was walking with the support of his attendant, looked up at Renato with a face wet with tears. Hung Nim, Trudy, hic, hiic. Thank you, hic, for coming. The eyes that became red because of crying, the cheeks that were stained with tears, the swollen lips, Trudy's face, seen up close, was miserable. Renato felt his heart ache as he saw Trudy thanking him. Trudy, whom he met again after a few years, was so small and young to the point of heartbreaking. What have I done? What have I done in my previous life to such a small child? Not knowing what to say, Renato twitched his lips. His sin was so great that he felt it hard to breathe. I'm sorry. After hesitating for a moment, Renato gathered his courage and opened his mouth. He couldn't run away again. Excuse me. Trudy raised his head when hearing the unexpected apology. The eyes filled with tears fluttered. I was too late. I should have come sooner. Renato slowly knelt on one of his knees to match eye level with Trudy. Then he carefully took Trudy's hand and apologized once more. It was a very late apology. I'm so sorry, Trudy. No. Trudy shook his head in shock when Renato apologized again. The child was confused and didn't know what to do, but then grabbed Renato's hand. The fact that Hung Nim came like this, hic. Trudy, who was about to say it was okay, suddenly closed his mouth. The corners of his eyes and lips trembled, perhaps because he was overwhelmed with emotions. Renato's face darkened when he looked at the child's expression, revealing the agony in his heart. Unable to overcome the rush of guilt, he bowed his head. He couldn't look straight into Trudy's face. I'm sorry I left you alone, Trudy. All I can do is apologize. Renato felt a deep sense of self-hatred. But he couldn't think of anything other than that. Perhaps he would be a sinner all his life in front of Trudy. In his previous life, he couldn't help Trudy properly. At the time, all Renato could do was give Trudy some information while avoiding surveillance. And even that became difficult after the Empress found out. How anxious must he have been when he was alone? How scared must he have been? His pale purple eyes became dark. The little warmth in his hand was so sad and pitiful that he didn't know what to do. Chapter 4. In his previous life, after Ludmilla's funeral, Trudy was swept away in a vortex of political strife. Some tried to use Trudy, and some tried to get rid of Trudy. Although there was the Emperor's protection, it was not enough to completely protect the child. Eventually, a tragedy occurred. Something has happened. His Imperial Highness, Prince Trudy. One day during the dry rainy season, Trudy passed away because of a similar disease to Ludmilla. There were many doubts, but the investigation was not carried out properly. Renato knew there was something suspicious about Trudy's death, but he couldn't tell anyone. As always, no one listened to him. He didn't even know who to tell that to. Broken by the successive tragedies, Renato felt a deep sense of helplessness. A feeling of despair that he couldn't do anything swallowed him up. After that, Renato lived just like a breathing corpse. He could only helplessly watch the Emperor's death and Maximo's coronation. After all, he was a being who couldn't do anything. But he would be different this time. Renato clenched his teeth and grabbed the little hand. He gave strength to the hand, grabbing that small hand as if he would never let go. Trudy. Hic. Yes. At Renato's call, Trudy hiccuped and looked up at him. Renato raised his other hand and wiped the child's cheek, which was damp with tears. Nim, I'm too shameless to ask this of you, but will you forgive me? Forgive? Trudy was confused by Renato's plea for forgiveness. He couldn't figure out why Renato was behaving like this. But apart from his confused mind, the moment he heard Renato's words, an unknown sadness flooded over him. The anxiety and despair he had to endure alone in the past few days soared up. Trudy inadvertently grabbed Renato's hem. Nim won't leave me, right? Renato's eyes shook when hearing the child's plea. Not waiting for Renato's answer, Trudy dug into his arms. He thought that Renato would leave him behind and walk away if he didn't do so. Please don't leave me. Don't leave me like how Mother did. Don't leave me alone, please. As if grabbing a lifeline, the small hand desperately grabbed and clung to Renato's clothes. Renato's eyes became wet with that pitiful gesture. In the end, he couldn't resist and embraced the small trembling body. I will not leave. Really? Really? Yes, I promise. I will always be by your side. So let's stay together. Hearing Renato's whisper, Trudy's face severely contorted. The child couldn't hold back anymore. Renato held back his tears as he comforted Trudy, who was sobbing as if the entire world was leaving him. If a miracle had truly happened, if this moment was truly reality, there was only one thing for him to do with his newly acquired life. Protecting Trudy no matter what. Yes, I returned to the past for that reason. The pale purple eyes shone resolutely when he finally found the reason for his regression. His confusion disappeared, and the eyes that had a goal were firm and unwavering. His bloodshot eyes turned to Ludmila's coffin. I'll protect you, Nim, I will protect you, Trudy. Definitely, this time. The words came out of his mouth before he could even think. Renato repeated the words that he would protect the child as if chanting a spell. It was an oath to Trudy and a promise to himself. Nim. Trudy became tearful with Renato's words and clutched the hem of his shirt as if never to let go. Renato also gave strength to the arm that was holding Trudy. Tears filled his eyes, blurring his vision. But Renato didn't cry anymore. Instead, he swore to Ludmila in his heart. He would never repeat the same thing he did in his previous life, and he would be willing to sacrifice his life for that. So cold, I might freeze to death at this rate. Nasir curled up his body as much as possible to avoid the fierce wind on his skin. He walked as fast as he could to arrive at his destination, the greenhouse. I'm finally feeling alive. Nasir's expression softened a little when he arrived safely. The greenhouse, which maintained a suitable temperature all year round, was a completely different world from the strong blizzard raging outside. Nasir felt his frozen body warm up little by little when he walked inside. Where would he be? Nasir looked around and murmured. The purpose of his visit to the greenhouse was to find his boss. Located at the back of the royal castle, the greenhouse was a place where Khalid, the Grand Prince as well as the commander of the Black Wolf Knights, stayed when thinking about something or taking a quiet break. Eve's note: the original word used for Grand Prince here is literally a monarch's younger brother. Since there is no equivalent word for it in English and it can get confused with the normal word for prince, I would make Khalid's title, Grand Prince, in this novel. Hayes, let's ask the gardeners to clean up this place. Is this a greenhouse or a forest, even? Nasir groaned as he pushed aside the bushes in front of him. The trees and flowers in the greenhouse were all different in size and length. Each time Khalid went on an expedition, he collected the local flowers and trees and randomly filled them into this place. The greenhouse was only maintained with minimal care, as even a veteran gardener would raise both their hands and feet, not knowing where to start and how to touch this place. Found it. After pushing away the tangled branches and vines, Nasir finally found a way. As he walked along the path, he soon found a Zelkova tree so high that he could not see the end and stopped in that place. This Zelkova tree that seemed to be several hundred years old had existed since the establishment of the kingdom. Nasir roughly removed the leaves attached to his body, sighed, and took a deep breath. Your Highness, I know you're here, so please come out. Her Majesty the Queen has given you a royal command. Eve's note: again, to lessen the confusion, the courtesy titles of Empire's princes like Renato and Trudy would be, Your Imperial Highness, while Khalid's would be, Your Highness. Newnham did, yes, so please come down. This is an order issued by Her Majesty directly to you, Your Highness. As Nasir urged in a loud voice, the leaves shook and a man in light clothes appeared. Khalid landed down with a gentle movement despite his body frame and got up with a sullen face. What can this be? It's the thing that has been bothering you lately, Your Highness. As if Khalid was asking something obvious, Nasir pulled out a letter with the name of the Queen from his chest pocket. Khalid snatched away the issued order that Nasir was holding out. The Black Wolf Knights commander, Khalid Nur Hakan, is appointed as the foreign ambassador and military cooperation advisor to the Floret Empire. As you can see from the order, your term of office will start next month. Ha! Khalid burst into laughter when hearing Nasir's added words. He had expected this to some extent, but it was much sooner than expected. The current diplomatic ambassador's term of office will only end around half a year later. No. It is said that Count Henry is not in good health. That old man is, Khalid asked with an expression saying he just heard some nonsensical thing. Hearing his words, Nasir shrugged his shoulders and opened his mouth. I'm not sure. No one knows if he is really sick or not. By the way, what do you mean by, old man? Please say nice words. What if someone heard it? You are saying that again. Did the Empire agree with this? Since it was Your Highness who was appointed as the ambassador, wouldn't that side welcome you with open arms? Also, Count Henry already expressed his will to resign, so they requested that the new diplomatic ambassador to the Empire should be able to begin military action as soon as possible. They hoped that the size of the Knights' Order staying in the capital would be larger than it is right now. So they openly requested the army of another country. What if we change our minds and take over the Imperial Palace? I don't know if they have no sense of crisis, or just that they are stupid. Doesn't it just show how bad things are at their place? According to the report of the informants, the Emperor's condition appears to be unusual. The Imperial Consort has also recently passed away. Imperial Consort? Ah, the mother of the second prince who was rumored to become the crown prince in the future. Hearing Nasir's words, Khalid traced his memory. The emperors of the Floret Empire were allowed to have another companion besides the empresses for the sake of passing down their noble blood. The empire recognized the emperor's second companion as an imperial consort, and their children were also recognized as direct imperial family members. That's right, because the first prince whom the empress gave birth to is a beta, his right to inherit the throne is not recognized, so in the current situation, the second prince is the closest to the next throne. However, the imperial consort didn't have much support back when she was alive, while the prince himself is also too young, so we don't know what will happen yet. Officially having a second companion, and passing the throne to their children, I always knew this, but that place is a very strange country. Khalid muttered in curiosity. Unlike the Floret Empire, the Khan Kingdom did not recognize illegitimate children except under special circumstances. Growing up in a kingdom where paramour and illegitimate children were treated as criminals and despised, the imperial family that officially recognized a second companion and their children felt very foreign to him. Isn't it because the imperial family descendants there are so precious? The blood flowing through their bodies is also special. Why do people there discriminate based on traits while respecting bloodlines so much? There are rumors that the Beta Imperial family members are inferior in many aspects compared to the Alpha and Omega Imperial family members, but no one knows the truth. And having a second companion is not common in the Empire as it is a system specifically permitted only to the Imperial family and the nobles who have inherited the blood of the Imperial family. It's still a problem. Each country has different customs and traditions. Well, in terms of flaws, our country is not without problems, right? Right now, there is still a group of disrespectful people who fuss over Her Majesty's gender, no? That's true. Khalid smiled bitterly when hearing Nasir's words. Although it had been 3 years since Mariam ascended to the throne, there were still many dissatisfied nobles within the kingdom. Among them, Duke Vint, a collateral royal family member, led the noble faction and tried to obstruct Mariam in everything she did. I should have just killed them all no matter what Nunam said back then. We showed mercy for no reason at all. Khalid, thinking of Duke Vint, gritted his teeth. It was obvious that the one intervening in the appointment of the new foreign ambassador to the Floret Empire and putting pressure to send him to the Empire was that man. Chapter 5. Should I just kill them now? The blood-red eyes sank with a dim light. He was afraid of taking action too rashly and became an obstacle for Mariam, but Khalid was ready to get blood on his hands again at any time. Another terrifying thing to say again, what are you going to do if someone hears you? Who else is here beside us? And if they want to hear it, just let them hear. Anyway, according to the news from the informants, the atmosphere in the capital is chaotic. Nasir coughed and turned the topic back to the Floret Empire. If it was Khalid, the man would really do something like that. Before that could happen, he had to draw his attention to another topic. When we go to the Empire, we'll have to be careful in many ways. Otherwise, we may become entangled in the battle for the throne. Battle for the throne? Didn't you just say a little while ago that the second prince is the most likely to be the crown prince? Or is the empress trying to put his child on the throne? No, there is another candidate that the empress and his family are pushing for. What does that mean? Khalid frowned when hearing the new information. Nasir calmly said about the information he had gathered. The empress is trying to adopt a collateral imperial family member, Lord Maximo of Florence Duchy, as an adopted son. He is said to be an alpha that has a tie to the Medici family. It seems too complicated there. Khalid listened to Nasir's explanation and put his chin on his hand. He had no intention of rejecting the diplomatic ambassador position since it was a royal order, but the timing was probably not right. It's hard to look good if we get caught up in the politics of another country, tisk. First, do some more research on Maximo Florence. And find out which one has the upper hand, him or the second prince. Yes, Your Highness. Khalid pondered for a moment and ordered Nasir to conduct a detailed investigation. As the Floret Empire was an important source of money for their kingdom, it was necessary to keep an eye on the situation. Especially if it was a place he would be staying for the next few years. Time is running out, so I'll have to prepare right away from tomorrow. I also have to meet with Her Majesty. Should I send someone to the main palace? Yes, tell Her Majesty that I will meet her. It's a little late today, so make it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Understood, sir. Call for a watchmaker too. Watchmaker. Organizing the list of to-dos in his mind, Nasir blinked when he heard an unexpected command. Why are you suddenly looking for a watchmaker? Why else? Because my watch is broken. Pardon, why did it break? There is a protective spell on it, right? I don't know either. It suddenly broke at dawn. Shrugging his shoulders, Khalid took a silvery white pocket watch from his pocket and opened the lid. Then, the broken glass inside was revealed. Last night, I had a rather unsettling dream, but I woke up feeling something strange in my sleep, and this is what happened. Oh my goodness, this is a bit harsh. Nasir looked at the broken pocket watch with a surprised face. He knew how much Khalid cherished this watch. Khalid never left his watch away from his chest pocket even as he went out to the battlefield, did government affairs, or rested at home. Because it was a special keepsake left by his mother, Jamila. Perhaps someone has put a curse on you, Your Highness. Otherwise, it would have been fine even in the war. Nasir's expression became serious. Jamila, a talented shaman, cast a very powerful protective spell on that watch. She then left a will to Khalid that he should carry it with him. Perhaps it was because of the protective spell, Khalid's watch never got a scratch, let alone broken. The watch, which always seemed new, suddenly broke. It was definitely strange. There is also that possibility. If there is a curse, there would be a trace on the watch, so let's show this to Alia. That is a good idea. Nasir agreed with Khalid. Alia was a shaman belonging to the Knight's Order, and although she was young, she was a talented person. If there is indeed a curse, I can understand why you had a nightmare. Nightmare. Khalid murmured those words, then fiddled with the watch. In his dream, he saw someone crying. That person was crying so sadly that it was hard for him to breathe because his chest ached just looking at that person. But he couldn't remember who that was. When he woke up, all he remembered was that he had handed the person in his dream the watch that was the keepsake of his mother. It was a sad dream. A sad dream, yes, it almost brought tears to my eyes. Recalling the feelings he had in the dream, Khalid involuntarily squinted one eye. In response to Khalid's answer, Nasir put on an expression saying he just heard something strange. He couldn't tell if that was a joke or a serious one. Please don't worry too much. It is just a dream. Alright, anyway, call Alia. We need to fix it before we leave, so let a watchmaker check it as soon as possible. Understood. Nasir engraved Khalid's instructions in his head, then sighed and lamented. Hayes, I thought we would be able to rest for a while, but we have been kicked out of the country. Think positively. Would the Floret Empire be a bad place? We will have a warm winter for the next 5 years. But for how long will we be in the capital? Surely they will ask for military cooperation from time to time. Then even better. We can rip off something from them thanks to that. Khalid smiled like a mischievous child while putting his thumb and index finger in a circle. Nasir felt his heart ache when looking at the man's carefree appearance. Her Majesty the Queen is really indifferent. Nasir fixed his facial expression, swallowing the resentment that reached his throat. As Khalid's aide, he had a lot of things against Mariam whether the man knew it or not. Probably all members of the Black Wolf Knights felt the same way as him as well. But Khalid, who was the most upset, didn't resent Mariam, so he couldn't say anything about it. So today again, Nasir swallowed down his discontent that had nowhere to vent. "We will be arriving soon, Your Imperial Highness." Renato raised his heavy eyelids when hearing Louis's announcement that they would arrive at the Empress Palace soon. His eyes felt stiff, perhaps because he didn't sleep well yesterday. "Are you okay? You look very tired." I'm fine. It's just that I didn't get enough sleep." "What were you doing in the library?" After hesitating for a moment, Louis asked in a cautious tone. Yesterday, after attending Ludmilla's funeral, Renato sent Louis and Luna back as soon as he returned, and confined himself to the study alone. And he did not come out until daylight. He would probably still be in his study if the Empress Palace didn't send a person upon hearing that he had attended Ludmilla's funeral. "I was just thinking about what to do next." "Pardon, what do you mean?" I'll tell you everything when the time comes. I still haven't made up my mind yet." Renato gently curled up the corners of his eyes to ask Louis not to inquire further. It was true that he hadn't organized all of his thoughts. All night long, he pondered how to keep Trudy away from the Empress and Marquis Metis. But he couldn't come up with a proper way. He accepted that he had regressed to the past, but he was at a loss as to how he could change the future. After all, Renato, back in the past and even now, was always a powerless prince. An extra who couldn't even get a supporting role in a play or novel. That was how people looked at Renato. And he knew his own situation better than anyone. He couldn't help but know. Because he lived and died with that kind of neglect in his previous life. The reason Renato, the first prince and the only child of the Empress, was ignored and rejected by people was because he was a beta whose right to the throne was not recognized. "We are the successors of the noble blood of the Fairy King." Shortly after the founding of the Florette Empire, the imperial family emphasized that they were special existences of the Fairy King's lineage to consolidate their imperial power. In fact, the imperial family members of the Florette Empire were healthier and lived longer than normal people, perhaps because of their fairy blood. Their appearances were also as beautiful as flowers, regardless of age or gender, and they looked much younger than people of the same age no matter how old they were. They were not much affected by poisons, and even if they were injured, their wounds would heal quickly. It was because the fairy blood flowing through the imperial family members was a better remedy and antidote than any other medicine in the world. Fear of becoming old and sick was a feeling most people had. Therefore, in people's eyes, the imperial family of the Florette Empire certainly looked special. Thus, many people admired and envied the imperial family, and hoped to become a member of it. However, even the imperial family could not avoid the differences based on their traits. Due to their innate nature, alphas and omegas were superior to betas in both physical and talent aspects. It was a very small difference, but people took it very seriously. Then, they came to think that the beta imperial family members were inferior to the alpha and omega imperial family members. Therefore, an atmosphere of rejecting beta imperial family members was created to occupy the only throne within the Florette imperial family. It was to reduce a possible competitor. Thus, about 300 years ago, the beta imperial family members' right to succeed to the throne was officially deprived. From then on, the sufferings of the beta imperial family members began. The narrow-minded ideology that had continued for hundreds of years was solidified day by day and had become a means to justify discrimination. Amid such an atmosphere, Renato, who was born a beta that could not become the emperor, had no choice but to be in a cramped position. Sidekick Prince. Chapter 6. The Sidekick Prince of the Imperial Family. Renato knew what people were calling him. Sidekick Prince meant that Renato was just a secondary being who could never be the main character. That was also something people said while comparing an alpha like Trudy and a beta like Renato. People said that if Trudy was the protagonist who would ascend to the throne, Renato was just an outsider. They also said so to disregard the Metis family. Empress Blanche was a dominant omega, but his father, Marquis Metis, was a beta. People ridiculed that Renato was born a beta because he had the Metis family's blood. Naturally, the Empress and Marquis Metis hated hearing those words. In particular, this was especially the case for the Marquis, because to him, it sounded as if he could never become a leader in the society of the imperial family and the great nobles where alphas and omegas played the main roles, no matter how powerful he was. Highness, your Imperial Highness. What were you thinking about? No, it was nothing. Renato escaped from his heavy thoughts, answered and slightly shook his head. Having been thinking a lot since yesterday, he now had a headache. He got out of the carriage, massaging his throbbing temples with his hand. Welcome, your Imperial Highness. His Majesty the Empress and Marquis Metis are waiting for you. I will guide you to the back garden. The Chamberlain of the Empress Palace greeted Renato in a very businesslike manner. Guided by the Chamberlain, Renato walked in. From here on, please go in alone. Having guided Renato to the entrance to the back garden, the Chamberlain stepped aside. Renato gave strength to his trembling lips and repeatedly clenched and opened his fist. His hands started to sweat when the thought that both the Empress and Marquis Metis were in there came to his mind. Taking a deep breath, Renato moved his feet again. Soon, he could see people sitting in the pavilion of the back garden. It was Empress Blanche and his father, Marquis Emilio Metis. While having a conversation with Marquis Metis, Blanche noticed Renato entering the back garden and frowned. He got up and shouted before Renato could even say his greetings. What were you even thinking? Why did you go there yesterday? Greetings to your Majesty the Empress, the companion of the noblest blood in the Empire. May the blessings of nature be with you. Renato was momentarily stiff, bowed his head and said his greetings half a beat late. It had been years since he last saw Blanche alive. Do you think this is the time for greetings? I asked what you were even thinking when you went there yesterday. Answer me, are you talking about when I attended the ritual yesterday? Renato raised his upper body and looked at Blanche. In the past, he would not have been able to respond properly or even breathe as soon as Blanche yelled at him, but now he could answer better than he had thought. Of course, he was not completely fine. Renato could feel his body tremble, and he gave strength to his toes. The fear constantly engraved on his body for a long time did not go away easily even if he died and came back to life, and even if he met someone that was supposed to die a long time ago. Yes, I heard you showed a very desperate brotherhood with that damn little kid as well. Why did you do so? Since it was the last day, I decided it would be good to show my face once. In response to Blanche's interrogation, Renato said aloud the excuses he had prepared in advance. Perhaps not liking his answer, Blanche became fiercer. Why are you judging that on your own? Who told you to think like that? Won't I have to go meet His Majesty the Emperor the day after tomorrow? I was afraid that His Majesty might ask why I didn't attend the funeral or get angry. My apologies. I was thoughtless. Renato reflexively shrank his shoulders as soon as he heard the sharp rebuke and explained in a low voice. He felt a cold sweat running down his back. Why do you have to care about the Emperor? Stop. Just as Blanche was about to continue, Marquis Metis raised his hand and intervened. Blanche stopped at the Marquis gesture and quietly closed his mouth. Marquis Metis, who had silenced Blanche with just a single word, moved his gaze to look at Renato. The moment he met the man's deep purple eyes, Renato lowered his gaze to avoid him. To him, Marquis Metis was more difficult to deal with than Blanche. It is understandable why His Imperial Highness did such a thing. In all those years, you have taken care of Her Highness the Imperial Consort and His Imperial Highness the Second Prince because of His Majesty the Emperor's order. His Majesty definitely heard about that during those years, whether intentionally or not. So you must have been afraid that if you didn't attend the funeral, you would fall out of His Majesty's favor. Marquis Metis looked up and down at Renato as if scrutinizing him and slowly opened his mouth. However, it would have been better if you had consulted with me or His Majesty the Empress before attending the ritual. I was in a hurry yesterday, so I didn't think about it. I only thought about what to do and moved impulsively. I'm really sorry. Ho, there's no need to apologize to me. Marquis Metis smiled benevolently when Renato apologized with a submissive attitude. His smile was so warm that people who didn't know would mistake it for affection, but Renato knew it was not the truth. He gulped and waited for the Marquis to speak. Your judgment was not wrong, Your Imperial Highness. As His Majesty the Emperor is keeping us in check, it is better not to do anything that will cause a backlash to us. Fortunately, Marquis Metis did not have much of an issue with Renato's attendance at the funeral. When Blanche heard the news, he ran wild and called Renato over, but the Marquis didn't seem to take this very seriously. Anyway, the past is already the past, so let's end this story here. You are also aware of His Imperial Highness' situation, so please understand him graciously, Your Majesty. If Father says so. When Marquis Metis intervened, Blanche's vigor quieted down. However, he continued to stare at Renato. I am sorry to have troubled you, Your Majesty. And thank you very much, Marquis. Renato apologized to Blanche and thanked the Marquis. Seeing Renato bowing his head like someone who received a great favor, Marquis Metis put on a satisfied expression. He liked to be confirmed that he had the upper hand compared to Blanche and Renato. It has been a week since we saw each other at the funeral, so I would like to have a relaxed conversation with you, but it's not possible because we already have a prior appointment. It's a pity. A prior appointment? Yes, Lord Maximo is supposed to come. But if you are okay with it, we can have tea time together, Your Imperial Highness. No, if I stay here, I will only get in the way, so I will leave. When he heard that Maximo was coming, Renato's eyes slightly trembled. He tried to stay calm and turned down the Marquis offer. Marquis Metis didn't even bother to persuade him. Then please do so. Thinking about it, the regular checkup day will come soon, so I'll see you then. Regular checkup. Hearing those words, blood drained from his body in an instant. When he recalled, around this time, Marquis Metis would regularly take his blood on the pretext of a checkup. However, the checkup was only a facade, and the Marquis' real purpose was his research. He wanted to use Renato's blood to make, Fairy's Tears, an imperial elixir known as a panacea. So I have to go through that terrible thing again. Renato pressed his lips so that his expression would not shake. He didn't want to cooperate with Marquis Metis, but there was no way he could refuse right now. I will tell my chief attendant to prepare to meet you when that time comes, Marquis. Renato smiled so that the Marquis wouldn't think he was acting strangely, and respectfully bade farewell to Blanche. I will be leaving now, Your Majesty. Yes. Hearing Renato's farewell, Blanche just bluntly nodded his head. As always, he never showed affection towards his child. I can't leave it like this. Leaving the two of them behind, Renato walked away from the back garden with a restless face. The meeting between the Empress and Marquis Metis made it clear. Although he went back in time, he was still helpless. At this rate, he would lose Trudy and, of course, Louis and Luna again. When Renato couldn't overcome his anxiety and bit his lower lip as he faced the cold reality, a voice reached his ears, making him pause his steps. Well, look who we have here. This voice. Renato widened his eyes and stood still. He managed to turn his head, trying not to stumble. Then, at the end of his vision, he saw silver hair darker and duller than his own. A face younger than in his last memory, but also a face that he could never forget. Quote ellipsis ellipsis exclamation mark quote. Renato's eyes trembled like earthquakes when he saw who had called him. Compared to a while ago when he greeted the Empress and Marquis Metis, his trembling was much more severe. Greetings, Your Imperial Highness. Maximo, standing in front of Renato, greeted him sarcastically. Renato didn't answer. To be more exact, he couldn't come to his senses to greet the man back. What, are you ignoring my greeting now? Maximo narrowed his eyebrow, displeased when Renato didn't respond to his greeting. The man's sloppy honorifics also disappeared. Maximo, who was the same age as Renato, always talked informally to him on private occasions, but not in public situations. As the man was a collateral imperial family member that had ties to the Metis family, and because he had known Renato from a young age, even if he behaved like this, the adults around never stopped him. This was also possible because Maximo was an alpha with imperial blood. Due to those circumstances, Maximo always disregarded Renato, who was a beta even in their childhood days. His behavior only got worse when he joined hands with the Metis family. Sidekick Prince. Chapter 7. Why don't you greet me, huh? Renato, whose shoulders stiffened because of Maximo's low voice, barely moved his lips. Long time no see, Maximo. It's so hard to force a greeting out of you, huh? Well, it seems like you finally greeted me. Yes, long time no see. Renato looked at Maximo, who was smirking while standing in a slanted posture, and strongly bit the inside of his mouth. He might scream if he didn't do so. I heard that you have an appointment with His Majesty the Empress today. Go in. They are waiting for you now. Ah, that's right, I have to take on a troublesome task this time. Troublesome task? Yes. I was told that I had to become a special protocol officer and befriend the new diplomatic ambassador from the Khan Kingdom. Tisk. Maximo clicked his tongue and ruffled his hair with an annoyed expression. Because of that, he didn't see Renato widening his eyes because of his answer. The new diplomatic ambassador. With those words, Renato's mind became sharp as if he was drenched by water. The diplomatic ambassador coming from the Khan kingdom at this time was definitely that person. When he was in despair after losing Trudy in his previous life, that person was the one that approached him first and reached out to him. "Can I help you?" Thump. When he thought of that person, his heart beat because of a different feeling compared to before. The voice with a deep resonance rang in his ears. The rough hand that carefully reached out to him glimmered in Renato's vision. "If you need my help, I will help you as much as I can. Can we meet again, me and that person?" Renato inadvertently fumbled around his left chest pocket. It was the place of a watch that he always carried just like a part of his body until he died. "It's troublesome, but I have to do it anyway. Now that I have to start my political activities in earnest." "What's wrong with you? Do you feel unwell anywhere?" Maximo narrowed his eyebrows and spoke when Renato suddenly grabbed his chest. "Now that I look again, your complexion seems a bit bad." Maximo frowned, raising his hand with an uncharacteristically worried expression. However, his hand reaching out toward Renato did not reach its intended destination. Out of fright, Renato slapped Maximo's hand. Slap. After that sharp sound, only silence followed. Maximo looked at Renato and his hand in confusion. He couldn't understand what had happened to him. Renato was even more flustered than Maximo. Realizing what he had done, he backed away with a pale face. "So, sorry, I was surprised." Renato hastily apologized to Maximo. He didn't even understand why he had behaved like that. The moment Maximo's hand came into his vision, his body moved first before he could think. Perhaps it was because of his memories of his previous life. Renato easily assessed his condition. He was afraid of both Blanche and Marquis Metis, but Maximo was a little different from them. In his previous life, Maximo constantly tormented Renato and eventually took his life. When he recalled that time, goosebumps crept across his entire body. Renato pursed his lips when he felt something hot crawling up his throat. His stomach suddenly churned, and the area around his waist felt like it was on fire. It was the place where he was stabbed by Maximo's sword in his previous life. "What's your relationship with that goddamn bastard?" "Just what? That punk? Fuck. You just pretended to be docile, how dare you? Pathetic useless trash that didn't know your own place. Do you think you could have lived until now if it wasn't for me? You didn't even feel grateful that I saved you, and were having that kind of affair behind my back. Just when? Since when have you had that kind of relationship with that bastard? You didn't. Do you really think I will believe that? You can't leave the Imperial Palace until you die. I will have you stay next to me and draw out your blood for the rest of your life." The face of Maximo, who was furious with him just before his death, and the current Maximo who was looking at him with a shocked expression superimposed. Even all the words that he poured out in his rage also rushed into Renato's mind. Then, the memories of the one-sided violence and the fear engraved in his bones revived, making his mind return to that day. His breathing was getting harder, and his head was spinning. Renato shuddered and widened his distance from Maximo. He felt as if that man was going to strangle him and kick him at any moment. To Renato, Maximo was someone who would use violence against him at any time. Now that he was weaker than the Empress and Marquis Metis, that man was showing his manners and suppressing his temper, but Renato knew his true nature better than anyone else. So he was scared. "I'm not feeling well, so I will have to go now." "Wait." After speaking, Renato turned around as if running away. No, he was indeed running away. He heard Maximo calling him from behind but ignored it. As soon as the man's voice reached his ear, the nape of his neck became tense and his hands and feet became cold. "Your Imperial Highness." As Renato ran to the carriage, Louis greeted him with a surprised expression. Renato entered the carriage, unable to even answer. Otherwise, he felt as if Maximo would chase after him and stab the sword into his stomach again. Having entered the carriage, Renato exhaled heavily and sat down on the floor. Louis also hastily followed to support him. Then he locked the carriage door firmly so that no one else could see inside. "Are you okay? Just what happened?" Louis, huff. Renato was about to say something to Louis, but then covered his mouth with one hand and retched. Perhaps because his tension was relieved, the urge to vomit that he had forgotten while running rushed in. "Your Imperial Highness." Louis raised his voice when he saw Renato's upper body leaning forward. Cough. After retching a few more times, Renato coughed. The inside of his neck felt as if burning. It hurts so much. Renato wrapped his trembling hand around the region between his belly button and waist. It was more painful than before. The pain as if his body was on fire or was pierced by a sharp object made him let out a groan. Please wait a minute. I'll call the doctor. Noticing that Renato's condition was unusual, Louis became restless and helped him lean on the chair. Then he turned his head to call someone. At that moment, Renato stopped him with a faint voice. No, just get going. How can I do that? Do you know what your face looks like now, Your Imperial Highness? If you call a doctor to this place, the Marquis will come. So, quickly, please. Renato grabbed Louis's hem and told him to get going. It was more of a plea than a command. Louis looked at Renato, whose body was shaking as if in pain, and bit his lower lip. Please go back to the palace. Hurry. His agony was brief. Knowing what Renato was worried about, Louis decided to follow him. When Louis shouted, the carriage quickly moved. Please lean on me, Your Imperial Highness. Louis changed Renato's posture to make him feel comfortable and helped him lean on his body. Then, with his hand, he rubbed Renato's arm. Entrusting himself to Louis, Renato took a deep breath. His stomach was boiling to the extent that he thought his intestines might melt. Perhaps that was why he couldn't breathe. Renato, whose body was drenched in sweat, closed his eyes with a tired expression. He had to keep himself conscious, but his vision kept getting blurry, making it hard to keep his eyes open. As the world around him darkened, a fever rose and tinnitus screamed in his heated ears. Renato felt the corners of his eyes getting wet, and covered his burning eyes with the back of his hand. The world he returned to was still a terrible hell. Welcome, Your Imperial Highness. It's been a while, Chamberlain. Renato smiled softly when Chamberlain Khalid warmly welcomed him. Khalid was one of the few people in the Imperial Palace who was kind to Renato. And he disappeared without a trace when Maximo became emperor in his previous life. As it turned out later, Khalid was the guardian of the recipe for the Imperial elixir, Fairy's Tears. Those who found out guessed that he disappeared because he didn't recognize Maximo as emperor. When Maximo found out that Khalid was the guardian later on, he was enraged. In a situation where his legitimacy was questioned because he did not receive the Fairy King's blessing and even the recipe for the Fairy's Tears disappeared, his position was greatly shaken. It was one of the events that triggered Maximo's obsession with Renato. It was not as effective as Fairy's Tears, but Renato's blood was needed to make the special remedy invented by Marquis Metis. Please come on in, His Majesty the Emperor is waiting for you. The Chamberlain softly smiled, stepped aside, and beckoned to the gatekeeper. Looking at the slowly opening door, Renato took in a deep breath before exhaling again. He was always nervous during their weekly meetings, but today, he was particularly anxious. Because, unlike usual, he had a purpose today. Greetings to the pinnacle of the noblest blood. May the blessings of nature be with you. Come in. A voice immediately rang out as if having waited for Renato's greeting. The Emperor, Tristan, who was leaning against the head of the bed with the Chamberlain's help, raised his hand and gestured for Renato to come closer. I heard that you shared the final moments together with the Imperial Consort. Thank you. Tristan thanked Renato as soon as he sat down. His emerald-colored eyes, cloudy like jewels covered with bubbles, gleamed with tears. If it wasn't for you, Trudy would have been alone there. Thank you so much, thank you. A hoarse voice came out from his white, blistered lips. Renato faintly smiled when Tristan thanked him again and again. I just did what I of course had to do. And above all, I have received a lot of favor from Her Highness. Favor? Come to think of it, you and Ludmilla had a really good relationship. Cough. Tristan let out a dry cough, perhaps because it was difficult for him to even say a few words, and recalled the past. About 10 years ago, when she was having a hard time adjusting to palace life, Ludmilla took an instant liking to Renato whom she met by chance. Your Majesty, may I become close with His Imperial Highness? Tristan accepted Ludmilla's request to interact with Renato, because he thought it was a good opportunity for both of them. The reason was that, while Ludmilla was ostracized because she was a stranger, Renato was ostracized because he was a beta. Fortunately, the two quickly became close. Ludmilla was no longer lonely, and Renato also followed her well because she was kind to him. His Imperial Highness wasn't born as a beta because of his own will, but everyone is too harsh. I'm disappointed with you too, Your Majesty. How could you be like that as a father? When she came to know about Renato's story, Ludmilla burst into tears. And Tristan realized his fault only after receiving harsh criticism from her. Of course, he didn't abuse Renato as Blanche did. He was disappointed because the child was a beta, but since Renato was his child, he tried to take responsibility as a parent. However, Tristan was the emperor of the empire, and he was very busy. Because of his expeditions, he usually left the palace. Because of that, he only occasionally took care of Renato through the chamberlain. And with that, he defended himself as a better person than the empress. When he heard Ludmilla's words, Tristan became unbearably ashamed. I'm really sorry for all this time. I know it's a shameless thing to ask now, but will you forgive this foolish father? Tristan accepted Ludmilla's advice to correct his mistakes even if it was late and apologized to Renato. The child, not knowing what to do with his sudden apology, quickly nodded his head slightly with a face holding back tears. From that day on, Renato called Tristan, Imperial Father, not, Your Majesty. Although their reconciliation was achieved after many twists and turns, a rift of 10 years was not easily fixed. The two maintained an awkward relationship. There was no dramatic improvement in the environment surrounding Renato. On the contrary, it had become worse than before. It was because of Blanche and Marquis Metis' hindrance since they feared that their influence on Renato would diminish. I hope that His Imperial Highness will be happy. Ludmilla couldn't help but feel sorry for Renato's situation when it was not getting better. But she couldn't do much. All she could do was hug and embrace the child who had been hurt by his mother's coldness and neglect. It would have been great if His Imperial Highness was really my son. Ludmilla became attached to Renato and treated the child like her own. Even after Trudy was born, her attitude remained the same. Trudy also followed Renato as an older brother. Seeing three people with a good relationship, Tristan felt relieved. He had hoped that if it went on like this, maybe someday there would be a way. But Tristan's hope was soon shattered. Tristan himself was seriously wounded on the battlefield and suffered from the aftereffects, while even Ludmilla collapsed from an unknown disease. How is your body? It's still the same. But I feel a little better today. Yesterday it was hard to even control my body. When Renato asked about his condition, Tristan slowly blinked and pulled himself out of the old memories. I always feel sorry for you, Renato. If my body hadn't been like this, the Empress and Marquis Metis wouldn't have been as unruly as they are now. Tristan blamed himself with a gloomy expression. The palace doctors warned him that the more he felt depressed, the worse his condition would become, but he couldn't stop blaming himself. A few years ago, when Tristan rushed on an expedition to assist Margrave Leonhard who guarded the eastern border, he was unexpectedly attacked and seriously wounded. His wound was so severe that an ordinary person would have died right on the spot, but Tristan survived thanks to the body blessed by the Fairy King. However, a terrible aftereffect remained, and he could never hold a sword again. For Tristan, a knight by nature, not being able to hold the sword any longer was like a death sentence. Unable to accept the change in his body, he suffered from severe depression. As his mind collapsed, his recovery was also slow. No, it became worse. Tristan could not get out of his sickbed even as years passed by. Even the fairy's tears, the imperial elixir, could not heal a mental illness. Maybe because of the ingredients, the medicine originally didn't have much of an effect on the imperial family members. To make matters worse, even Ludmilla was declared to not have much time left. Tristan's body was completely devoured by a mental illness and successive shocks. You will be able to recover soon. No, you have to recover. You have to be healthy again, for Trudy as well. Yes, I should. Tristan helplessly nodded his head. Then, with his upper teeth, he bit his lower lip which was covered with white dead skin, perhaps because his emotions were surging up. Renato quietly waited for Tristan to settle his emotions. I have something to tell you, Imperial Father. Seeing that Tristan had calmed down to some extent after a while, Renato opened his mouth with a determined expression. To me, what is it? Before Ludmilla Nim passed away, she left a separate will to me. What? The imperial consort did so. Tristan's eyes widened when hearing his unexpected words. Forgetting that his body was aching, the man raised his upper body. What did she leave behind for you? She asked me to protect Trudy. A sigh leaked out from Tristan's mouth when he heard about the arduous will left to Renato. Focus disappeared from the man's flickering eyes, and strength drained out from his stiff shoulders. I see, so Ludmilla told you so. Tristan muttered with a blank expression as if he was out of his mind, then closed his mouth. His contorted eyes became wet. I entrust Trudy to you. Please protect that child. Recalling Ludmila's will, Renato clenched the fist on his thigh. Even though it had already been 6 years, it felt as vivid as yesterday. Don't cry. What rights do you have to even cry? Renato took a deep breath in, lashed out at himself, and exhaled. An incompetent coward like him did not deserve to cry. I want to keep Ludmila Nimswil at all costs. To do that, I need your help, Imperial Father. Helping Trudy also means that you will have to take down the Empress in the future. Are you still saying this despite knowing that? Of course. Otherwise, I will not be able to protect Trudy. I already made up my mind. The moment Tristan met Renato's unwavering lavender-colored eyes, he realized that Renato's determination was firm. He really intended to confront the Empress and Marquis Metis. When the adult himself struggled with sadness and despair, the child, who had just become an adult, decided the direction he would take and was prepared to even abandon one of his parents. In a moment, Tristan felt a terrible sense of shame. He wondered what he had been doing when Renato made his decision. I know that you cannot fully believe my words. No, you cannot fully believe me, Imperial Father. The blood of the Metis family also runs through my body. Until now, I have never properly disobeyed His Majesty the Empress, and I have only been swayed around. As Renato continued to speak, Tristan's face darkened. It was also his fault that Renato could not escape from Blanche. Over the past few years, the noble faction, including Marquis Metis, had taken advantage of Tristan's bedridden time and rapidly grown in strength. Accordingly, Blanche's influence within the Imperial Palace also increased. As a result, Renato was oppressed by Blanche and Marquis Metis and forced to live as they wished. Unable to stand the rush of guilt, Tristan lowered his head. He was a foolish father who didn't take care of Renato in time, and couldn't properly protect his child even after realizing his fault. In reality, it is difficult for me to get away from His Majesty the Empress right now. That's why I need Imperial Father's power. Can you trust me and help me just once? Renato earnestly appealed to Tristan, hoping that he would understand his sincerity. But Tristan didn't answer right away. Chapter 9. You are better than me. After a while, Tristan broke the heavy silence with incomprehensible self-talk, then raised his head and looked at Renato. You are right, it's dangerous to trust you completely in the current situation, even more so now that the Empress and Marquis Metis have a different intention. Is it a failure? Renato pursed his lips when hearing Tristan's words and lowered his gaze. However, he raised his head because of the following words. I know that, but I trust you. Excuse me, why are you so surprised? You were the one that asked me to trust you. Tristan softly smiled at Renato when he widened his eyes in surprise. Just like how you cannot stand alone against the Empress or Marquis Metis, neither can I. It's a shameful thing to say, but I don't have the power to turn the situation around right now. If this continues, perhaps I won't be able to protect Trudy to the end. The glory of the past was long gone. His brilliant power was also shattered and crumbled. Tristan admitted that his situation was not what it used to be. For the sake of the future, it was time for him to face reality. So I will trust you. I know that you truly loved Ludmila and deeply care for Trudy, so, I want to trust you. So tell me, what can I do to help? Hearing Tristan's words, Renato's eyes shook like petals fluttering in the wind. Although their relationship had improved thanks to Ludmila, Renato basically had no faith in Tristan. Because it was enough for him to have vain expectations and then be disappointed afterward during his childhood. Because of that, in his previous life, he never dared to ask for help from Tristan. Rather, at that time, he assumed that Tristan would have been disappointed and angry with him, so he avoided him. In fact, Tristan left Renato alone after Ludmila's death. He probably thought that Renato was completely on Blanche and Marquis Metis' side. And even if it wasn't the case, taking care of Trudy with his condition would have been difficult enough, so he couldn't have paid attention to Renato. There was no way to know the truth now, but in the past, Renato did not visit Tristan, and Tristan did not find Renato either. Because of that, the relationship between the two fell apart. If I had had the courage in my previous life just like how I do now, would things have changed? Renato was confused by that thought for a moment, but then let out a small sigh. Regretting the past didn't help in the current situation. He soon regained his composure and said what he wanted with a determined voice. I heard that the young Lord of Florence Duchy is being mentioned as the special protocol officer to welcome the newly appointed diplomatic ambassador of the Khan Kingdom. I hope you can give me that role. Special Protocol Officer. It's not that difficult, but, can I ask what you are thinking? I heard that the new diplomatic ambassador is Khalid Nur Hakan, the Grand Prince of the Khan Kingdom. I intend to get close to him. Khalid Nur Hakan. As he said the man's name aloud, his heart momentarily fluttered. Khalid was the benefactor who helped Renato in his previous life. 2 days ago, when he heard about him from Maximo, Renato realized that the memories of his previous life could be used as a weapon. Information about the future. It was the information that he had ahead of both Marquis Metis and Maximo at this point. Renato immediately summarized the important events and figures in the future that he remembered in as much detail as possible. And he made plans to use it. Becoming a special protocol officer and meeting with Khalid were the first steps in his plan to change the destined tragedy. Are you planning to get close to the Grand Prince? Yes. The Khan Kingdom is a longtime ally and military cooperator of the Empire. If I can become close to him, we can get help in times of danger. Tristan softly hummed. He felt reluctant to invite external forces into the affairs of the Empire. The reason Marquis Metis wants to make Lord Florence the special protocol officer is to make a good impression on the Grand Prince. He hopes that the Grand Prince can fill in what he lacks. What the Marquis lacks? You mean military force? Do you mean he is trying to fill it through the Grand Prince? That is what I understand. The Emperor had something that Marquis Metis didn't. That was military power. Even if the Marquis had the upper hand in political power, the Emperor was still the supreme commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army. The loyalty of the military was still the same. Therefore, Marquis Metis turned to the outside. He wanted an army free from the Emperor's influence. For the Marquis, Khalid was a coveted prey. I think it's good to stay close to the Grand Prince to prevent any unexpected situation. Renato insisted in a rare strong tone. In his previous life, just like what Marquis Metis wished, Maximo became the special protocol officer. However, he failed to form a bond with Khalid. Due to Maximo's personality, it was highly likely that this would happen again even if he became the special protocol officer. However, Renato had another reason to want to become the special protocol officer. Khalid was an indispensable part of his plan. His Majesty the Empress and Marquis Metis will not object to me becoming the special protocol officer. To them, I am a good chess piece. They would think that it would bring no harm if I became close to the Grand Prince in Lord Florence's stead. I'll try to take advantage of that loophole. Once embedded in people's minds, a person's image would not change easily. Especially when he was a beta prince who was despised by everyone, and a child who had been ignored his entire life. Perhaps it might change later, but neither Marquis Metis nor Blanche would notice his betrayal right now. Renato was convinced of his thoughts. It was a decision he could make because he had been watching the two of them for over 20 years, including his previous life. I intend to take advantage of His Majesty the Empress and Marquis Metis' carelessness to get information and interfere with it. Until I gain some strength, I'm going to stay with them like before. Please understand this in advance. Are you okay with that? It could be dangerous if they notice it now. They won't notice that, because to both of them, I don't know anything, and am no different from an idiot that cannot do anything. If you think so, I understand. I'll call the Prime Minister the day after tomorrow and make you the special protocol officer. I did it. Renato inadvertently clenched his fists when Tristan granted his permission. His palms were wet, probably because he was nervous the whole time. Thank you very much. I will do my best not to disappoint you. Don't overdo it. I'm sorry that I'm putting a heavy burden on you. Tristan looked at Renato with eyes filled with worry and guilt, and let out a sigh like apology. Not at all. It's what I want to do. I will attract attention for the time being, so please just focus on your recovery, Your Majesty. I got it. Tristan nodded his head with a highly motivated expression. He was eager to recover as quickly as possible. If you need anything, feel free to tell me. Just contact the Chamberlain. Yes, Imperial Father. I'll be back today. Please have a comfortable rest. The talk was longer than expected. Renato, who had accomplished the purpose of meeting Tristan, hurriedly finished the conversation and got up. It was to give Tristan a rest. Having left the place, Renato let out the breath he had been holding back. Even though he only talked, his heart was racing as if he had been running with all his might. I can do it. It'll be all right. I can do it. Now it's just one step away. Renato looked down at his trembling hand and tightly clenched it. Then he mumbled to himself just like chanting a spell and walked towards the carriage. The pale purple eyes that had become more powerful than before shone resolutely. Wow, the weather is really nice. Isn't this just like spring? Khalid glanced to the side when he heard the exclamation. When their gazes met, Vice Commander Amavand grumbled while fanning with his hands. It's also winter, but it's so different. If I had known it would be like this, I would have just worn thin clothes. In our country, this would be early spring weather. Khalid briefly commented about the cold winds brushing his cheeks and earlobes. The Khan Kingdom, located in the highlands, had the longest winter on the continent and boasted the most severe cold weather. The empire's winter was only a little chilly for the kingdom's people, who were trained in the weather cold enough to freeze even the monsters. Can I take off my coat? I'm going to have a heat rash at this rate. No, we will be arriving at the capital soon. Everyone, dress properly. Khalid firmly stopped Amavand and ordered the knights to adjust their clothes. Then he turned his head to Nasir. The special protocol officer that will meet us today is the first prince. Yes, that's right, that beta. It's not what we expected. Didn't you say that there is a high possibility that Lord Florence, who is supported by the Empress side, will appear? According to our informants, it was originally almost confirmed, but the Emperor suddenly appointed the first prince. Aren't both the first prince and Lord Florence the Empress people anyway? The Emperor would not have chosen the first prince as the special protocol officer for no reason. Not much is known about the first prince. We'll never know what kind of person he is until we meet him in person. Nasir shamelessly rubbed the nape of his neck. Before he left the kingdom, he investigated in detail the internal affairs of the empire and the power structure, but there was little information about the first prince. Because he was a beta without the right to the throne, he did not show up much in public. Becoming a special protocol officer this time could be said to be the first government affair that he had been entrusted with as a prince. As soon as we arrive in the capital, we will re-investigate the first prince. Do that. It looks like we are ready. Let's go inside. Finishing their conversation, Khalid signaled the departure to Amavand. When Khalid and his party approached the gate, the captain of the capital guard shouted at the gatekeeper to open the door. Creak. With a loud noise, the huge gate opened, revealing a road that had numerous buildings on both sides and was wide enough for a few carriages to come and go. Previous chapter. Talk. Chapter 10. When Khalid and his party appeared, people walking down the street stopped and chatted. What is that? Who are they? The pattern on the flag that the flag bearer is holding, I think it's the Khan Kingdom. By the way, I remember hearing that a new diplomatic ambassador was coming from the Khan Kingdom. Is it that person? Khalid moved his horse, ignoring the gaze and interest pouring onto him. After passing through several downtown areas, he entered the ferry square connected to the Imperial Palace, where the winds carrying the scent of fragrant flowers greeted him. Oh, wow! Exclamations burst among the knights when they saw the square decorated with colorful flowers. Khalid glanced at the flying butterfly that was showing off its beauty for a moment, then stared straight ahead again. His eyes narrowed when he saw the man standing on the platform in the center of the square. Is it that person? Are you okay, Your Imperial Highness? Renato responded half a beat late to the question from behind him. When he turned his head in the direction of the voice, he saw Louis with a worried expression. I think you are very nervous. You can tell that. Hearing Louis's words, Renato awkwardly touched his cheek. He wondered if he was nervous enough for others to notice. His hands had been trembling since earlier. It's the first time something like this has happened, so I'm a little nervous. In fact, there were other reasons too, but he only gave a rough excuse to Louis. How could he say he was excited and looking forward to meeting that person? He would be able to meet him in a little while. Renato anxiously looked through the square where he was ready to receive his guests. A little while ago, there was news that the diplomatic ambassador and his party had entered the capital, so if nothing else happened in the middle, they would be here soon. Renato took a deep breath in and then exhaled to calm down his trembling chest. He had thought about how to act when he met Khalid again, and what words he would use to persuade him, but honestly, he was not confident. Your Imperial Highness, will you grant me the honor to dance with you, the descendant of the noble blood? In his previous life, he first met Khalid at an imperial ball he attended under Blanche's order. It was around half a year after the man was appointed as a diplomatic ambassador. So Renato didn't know what Khalid was like right after his arrival. All he could remember was that Maximo hated him very much. In other words, it meant that the current Khalid and the Khalid in his previous life were the same, yet different people. Renato continued to try not to forget that fact. He was afraid that he might make a mistake with Khalid. For him, it was a reunion, but for Khalid, today would be their first meeting, so he had to be careful not to make the man feel strange. Above all, it was impossible to rule out the possibility that Khalid's reaction or behavior would be different from that of his previous life. In his previous life, Khalid approached Renato first, but in this life, Renato approached him first. His future had already changed due to his actions, including attending Ludmila's funeral and his appointment as the special protocol officer. It was inevitable that his relationship with Khalid would change. He had hoped to see the man again someday, but he didn't want to see him this way. Renato's expression darkened for a moment. He loathed himself for devising a plan to attract Khalid to fulfill his purpose. But he couldn't help it. Unlike in the past, he had Tristan's cooperation, but Renato's power was still weak. It was as if he had gone to the battlefield without properly equipping a sword and armor. Khalid was the strongest and most attractive weapon Renato could have. Even if he failed, it would be worth a try. Renato intended to present conditions that Khalid would be unable to reject for the success of his plan. After work today, how about calling in another palace doctor to keep it a secret from Lord Marquis? Renato, whose mind was filled with thoughts about Khalid, was awakened by Louis's advice to see a doctor. Your complexion has been bad these days, so I'm really worried. Louis said with a worried expression. After Ludmila's funeral, Renato was in a bad condition all the time. At first, he thought it was because of the sadness of losing Ludmila, but it seemed that wasn't the only problem. With the help of His Majesty the Emperor, I think it will be possible. Should I ask Sir Chamberlain? I'm fine, you don't have to do that. Don't worry too much. How can I not worry? Louis unknowingly raised his voice and put on an upset face. His worried eyes were filled with affection for Renato. At that moment, Renato felt his heart overwhelmed with emotions. Both in the past and now, he could only feel sorry and thankful to Louis and Luna. Louis, Luna, listen to me. From today on, I intend to oppose His Majesty the Empress and Marquis Metis. Excuse me, what does that mean? If things keep going on like this, Trudy will be in danger. I want to protect the child even if I have to oppose them. Are you doing this because of Her Highness' will? It is also a reason, but I can no longer stand the evil deeds of the two of them. If Maximo becomes emperor, it will be difficult for you two to survive as well. So, can you follow my will? On the day he decided to cooperate with Tristan, Renato revealed his decision to Louis and Luna. The two supported Renato's will without any hesitation. Your Imperial Highness, please do not ask us. If you want to do something, just order it. I will follow whatever choice you make. That's right, the most important thing for me is that you are happy, Your Imperial Highness. So please do whatever you want. No matter what happens, I will always stand by Renato Nim's side. That day, Renato had a hard time holding back his tears when he saw Louis and Luna's willingness to obey his decisions unconditionally. In his previous life, both of them sacrificed their lives for him. And this time, they gladly volunteered to walk on the thorny path. What about me? Renato felt his chest become heavy and bit his lip. No matter how much he thought about it, he was not worthy of Louis and Luna's sacrifices. They were his nanny's children, so they had grown up together since they were little, but Renato was never a good master for the two. Rather, he had always caused them trouble, and never once did they benefit from him. Nevertheless, Louis and Luna remained loyal to Renato and showed unchanging affection. But Renato couldn't return the love that they gave him. On the contrary, he caused them trouble until the last minute. But this time would be different. Renato vowed to protect the two of them. To him, Louis and Luna were another family. I'm just nervous these days. I'll be fine with a little rest. Renato smiled to tell Louis not to worry too much. He was aware that his physical condition was strange these days. It was the first time in his life that he felt sick like this. However, there was no solution right now. Please just go see a doctor. It can't be just simple nervousness. When Louis opened his mouth to convince Renato once more, the quiet square turned into a commotion. At that moment, Renato abruptly turned his head. Ah! A small exclamation burst out from Renato's mouth as he saw the people who had just entered the square. Beyond the flying flag of the Khan Kingdom, he could see a black-haired man with a much more imposing physique than the others. Perhaps sensing Renato's gaze, the man who glanced at the square with an expressionless face looked straight up to face him. Although it was quite a distance, the bright red eyes looked straight at Renato just like a beast that had found its prey. It is that person. Renato made eye contact with Khalid and inhaled a deep breath. He recognized Khalid at a glance. The smooth forehead exposed through the glossy and curly hair, the thick eyebrows and slightly slanted eyes, the red irises that seemed as if they were carved by natural rubies, the tall nose bridge, and the long, elegant lips. He looked a little younger than the man in his memory, but he was the Khalid he knew. Renato stood dumbfoundedly like someone who lost his mind and stared at Khalid as he came closer. The joy, regret, and strange relief of meeting him rushed in all at once. "Your Imperial Highness," Louis called Renato in a soft voice when he just stood still, doing nothing. Renato came to his senses at that moment and hurriedly moved his feet. Meanwhile, Khalid, who had reached the platform, stopped his horse and jumped off with a light motion. "Welcome to the Floret Empire." Renato made sure his voice didn't tremble as he greeted Khalid. After being appointed as the special protocol officer, he practiced a natural expression and a soft tone in case he met Khalid again. He wanted to make a good impression on Khalid. But when they actually met, the practice he had been doing all this time was useless. Feeling his mind turn white, Renato repeatedly clenched and unclenched his fists. He was inwardly worried about whether his expression was awkward, his voice was strange, or whether he was greeting him properly. "I am Prince Renato L. Floret of the Empire. It is an honor for me to take on the role of welcoming our precious guests. Pleased to meet you for the first time, Your Imperial Highness, Prince Renato. My name is Khalid Nur Hakan." Fortunately, Khalid accepted Renato's greeting without showing any particular expressions. However, Renato stopped for a moment when hearing Khalid's reply. "First time." Those words strangely struck his chest. In an instant, Renato was at a loss for words. First time. Having gone back in time, it was true that this was the first time he had met Khalid. Because he was the only one who had memories of the past life. Knowing this, he had been determined not to make mistakes to Khalid just a while ago. Nevertheless, he was momentarily shaken by the man's greeting. Trudy, Louis and Luna, Blanche and Maximo, none of the people Renato had met since he regressed until now remember the past life. So it was natural that Khalid didn't have those memories either, but he somehow felt regret. Why? Renato momentarily fell into incomprehensible confusion. He was surprised at himself for feeling sad when Khalid didn't remember. Chapter 11. Your Imperial Highness, Khalid called Renato in a quizzical voice when he didn't respond to his words. "What's wrong? Did my greeting sound strange?" "Excuse me, no, not at all. I made a mistake." Renato, startled by Khalid's words, quickly shook his head. He realized his rudeness and was at a loss for words. Seeing that, Khalid opened his mouth first. "If that wasn't the case, I'm glad. I learned the official language late, so I'm not really confident. It's been a while since I last used it, so I wondered if I made a mistake in pronunciation or intonation." "Not at all. Your pronunciation and intonation are all excellent. My apologies for the rudeness." "Well, it's just that, I guess I was nervous because I finally met someone I have admired for a long time." Stupid idiot. Renato inwardly cursed himself and hurriedly made excuses. He didn't even know what he was talking about. He only worried that Khalid might have been offended by his rudeness. Hearing Renato's apology, Khalid's expression became strange this time. But Renato did not see his face. He was so flustered that he couldn't afford to look at or care about Khalid. "Please let me greet you again. Nice to meet you, Your Highness, Grand Prince Khalid. I am very delighted to be able to meet the knight that commands the continent." Ehem. After letting out a few coughs, Renato tried to raise the corner of his mouth and asked Khalid for a handshake. Khalid glanced at the hand that was extended to him, then gently grabbed it. "It's nice to meet you too. You're so welcoming towards me that I don't know what to do. First of all, I will guide you to the diplomatic office used by the Khan Kingdom. After that, please go to the official residence. You must be tired from the long journey, so we have prepared a carriage for you to move comfortably." After shaking hands with Khalid, Renato led him to the prepared carriage. His heart was pounding, and the hand that touched Khalid's was beating just like his heart. His palm was hot as if on fire. Renato curled his fingers inward as if catching the remaining warmth in his hand. It was a reunion that only he could remember. "Watch out, if it breaks, we'll be in big trouble." "All right, done. Now let's move over there." Through the open window came the voices of the knights unpacking their belongings. Having gotten used to the noise coming from outside, Khalid looked around the office he would be using in the future. "How is the office?" Having finished putting his luggage down on the desk that had been reserved for him, Nasir asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. It's better than I thought. Khalid answered in a quite satisfied tone. They weren't empty words, because the legation of the Khan kingdom was of a suitable size, and the facilities inside and outside the building were well equipped. The former ambassador, Count Henry, seems to have taken good care of it. Everything we need right now is provided. More than anything else, I think it's good that the official residence is right next to the diplomatic office. There will be plenty of rooms for the knights to use. It's a good thing. How about the training ground? Khalid nodded his head and then asked when he remembered something else. The training ground was also an important place for the knights who had to train every day. It seems a little narrow, but I asked the steward and he said that it was possible to expand it. Should we proceed with that? Do that. We can't neglect the training. As soon as Nasir got Khalid's permission, he took out his notebook. Having quickly finished his note, he spoke to Khalid again. I think we can rest without doing anything today. We will have to finish packing the luggage. Just take it slow. The official work will start next week, so there's no need to rush. That's true, but there is a banquet tomorrow evening to welcome you at the Imperial Palace, Your Highness. Banquet? Can I not go? Khalid frowned with disgust. For him, who was a knight by nature, banquets were always arduous tasks. That's the banquet to congratulate and welcome you since you have been appointed as a diplomatic ambassador, so how can you not attend, Your Highness? You are the main character. Tisk, it's so annoying. Realizing that there was no hole for him to escape, Khalid nervously swept through his hair. Thinking of becoming a spectacle in uncomfortable formal clothes already made him tired. They say that the first prince will send a carriage to the diplomatic office tomorrow afternoon. He also said if you didn't have a partner to attend the banquet with, he'd escort you himself, so what do you plan to do? Escort? Me? Yes. He also said that you could refuse without feeling pressured, but… what do you think? Me? Considering the position of the first prince and the complicated situation within the empire, I don't think it's a very good idea to get his escort. Wouldn't it be better to choose a suitable member of our knight's order as the partner? Among our knights, then will you be my partner? Eek, me. At Khalid's suggestion, Nasir took a step back, terrified as if he had heard something absurd. Khalid's expression darkened when he saw the outright rejection. You told me to choose any suitable person. I don't think I'm a suitable person. You usually have Omegas as partners when you go to such places, no? Why don't you go with an Omega like Dame Alia rather than an Alpha like me? Nasir awkwardly smiled and recommended Alia. He got goosebumps just imagining that he would become Khalid's partner. I know, I just randomly said so don't freak out. Why would I go to such a place with you? Does he think someone would want to go with him? Khalid frowned and looked out of the window. In his mind, he would like to go alone and just show his face for a while, and then leave as soon as the banquet began, but formality and etiquette were a problem. What should I do? Khalid tapped on the window frame with his finger, recalling the person he had been with just a moment ago. Then, the silver hair with a light purple tint and the good-looking face with youthful features came to his mind. He was a strange person. Thinking of Renato, Khalid's expression became mysterious. Recalling their first meeting a few hours ago, he felt a little strange. He had met a lot of people while going through the battlefields, but it was the first time he met someone like Renato. Welcome to the Flored Empire. I am Prince Renato L. Flored of the Empire. Renato had a clear and soft voice that suited his round and gentle face, and was obviously nervous. Since he had never been involved in government affairs as a prince, he was clumsy in things like eye contact and facial expressions. His voice also slightly trembled, so Khalid acted more politely than usual. Renato was not a politically important figure, but Khalid would have to see his face frequently for the next month or two, so he thought he'd make a moderately good impression. However, towards Khalid's greeting, Renato behaved as if he had heard something strange. As Khalid saw the pale purple eyes shaking like petals fluttering in the wind, he momentarily wondered what he did wrong. But his words shouldn't have anything for Renato to show that kind of reaction. What's wrong? Did my greeting sound strange? He carefully called out, wondering if something was wrong, and the person in the pure white cape greatly flinched. Renato made excuses with a startled expression. My apologies. Well, it's just that, I guess I was nervous because I finally met someone I have admired for a long time. Did he admire me? Khalid felt a little confused by Renato's excuses that didn't sound like excuses. As a famous knight, he met quite a few people who admired and respected him. Most of them were people walking the path of the sword. Unlike them, Renato looked like he had never held a sword properly. He could tell that just by looking at his slender waist or legs exposed outside the cape that covered his shoulders and chest. Why would a prince who looked like he had grown up peacefully admire him? Khalid fell into a little doubt. At that moment, Renato asked for a handshake as if trying to make up for the awkward atmosphere. I am very delighted to be able to meet the knight that commands the continent. Maybe it was because he had been outside in the cold weather for a long time, or because he was flustered by his mistake. Renato's outstretched fingertips were red as if dyed in flower petal extract. His snow-white cheeks were flushing red just like a porcelain doll. Khalid, captivated by that sight for a moment, came to his senses and took Renato's hand. As expected, the hand he touched was smooth and soft with no calluses. Renato sighed in relief when Khalid accepted his handshake. Having relaxed a bit, he led Khalid to the diplomatic office and then returned to the imperial palace. How strange. Recalling what happened with Renato, Khalid slightly narrowed his brows. Thinking back, he felt a bit uncomfortable. What's wrong? Hearing his murmuring, Nasir tilted his head while organizing his luggage. I'm talking about the first prince. It feels like we have already met somewhere. Chapter 12. Khalid truthfully told Nasir what had been bothering him for a while. Since his meeting with Renato, there was some kind of problem that continued to make one side of his chest uncomfortable. How is that possible? If that was the case, both you and I would have remembered him, Your Highness. And as far as I can remember, today is the first time we met. Nasir immediately denied Khalid's words. As he lived as Khalid's aide for the past few years, they had many mutual memories. And Renato was not in Nasir's memory. It's the same for me as well. But he feels strangely familiar. Did I perhaps see him before when we came to the Empire? We have been to the Empire a few times for military aid negotiations, so it's not impossible that the two of you have already met, but if that was the case, I'm sure you must have remembered him. To be honest, he doesn't have the kind of look that can be easily forgotten, right? Advertisement. Nasir asked back while referring to Renato's appearance. He knew it was impolite to judge other people's faces, but Renato had a beautiful appearance and a unique aura that would make anyone admire him. You're right, his face isn't common, so if I had passed by him even for a moment, I'd definitely remember him. So it's even weirder. Having spent years on the battlefield where a moment's inattention could cost his life, Khalid had a habit of observing and memorizing details wherever he went. Just like Nasir said, if he saw that face properly even for a brief moment, he wouldn't easily forget. He doesn't look like anyone I know, and I've never met him before, so what is this feeling? Khalid muttered as he couldn't understand. And there was another strange thing. It was Renato's attitude that seemed to be very delighted toward him. A grand prince who was an illegitimate child, and the youngest knight commander in the kingdom. Due to the circumstances in which he lived, Khalid was quicker and more sensitive than others. He could read the emotions in those lavender-colored eyes that were reminiscent of pale violets. He could clearly tell the joy and delight in Renato's eyes and expression toward him. Since he said he had wanted to meet Khalid a long time ago, it was not strange that he expressed goodwill, but what about his delight? Didn't he seem to have met someone he already knew? Khalid crossed his arms and fell into deep thought. After a while, he made a decision and spoke up. Send someone to the Imperial Palace early tomorrow morning to tell them that I will accept Prince Renato's request for escort. Excuse me, I don't think that's a very good idea. Wouldn't it be better to have Dame Alia as your partner to prevent useless gossip? If I go together with Dame Alia, those kinds of words will still come out anyway, no? They will say that we are sticking together or something. That's true, but, anyway, even though it was a request that the prince made first, I don't think it's polite to just refuse. We'll see each other often, so I should just go with him. Understood. Then I'll ask the steward if there's anyone I can send as a messenger. Nasir nodded his head with a slightly disapproving expression and went outside to find the steward. Khalid, left alone in the office, stared at the majestic imperial palace in the distance with eyes noticeably darker than before. He wondered if he would be able to know for sure the identity of this strange déjà vu he was feeling now if he met Renato again. Grand Prince Khalid accepted my request. Renato, who finished breakfast a little earlier than usual, opened his eyes wide in surprise when hearing the news that Louis had brought. Yes, his aide just contacted us a little while ago. He asked you to take good care of him. Louis answered while clearing the tableware with mechanical motions, then looked at Renato's face and tilted his head. Why do you look like that? Do you perhaps not want to be the Grand Prince's partner? I do want that, but I thought of course I would be rejected. Renato answered Louis's question with a puzzled expression. He brought up the escort offer to Khalid without much expectation, because anyone that knew even the slightest bit about the imperial family would likely reject Renato's offer. Knowing this but still wanting to take a chance, he sent an escort offer to Khalid's aide through Louis. It was to get close to Khalid as quickly as possible. He did so because it would be better to bring it up now rather than regretting that he should have tried it later, but now that he got an unexpected result, he was more surprised than happy. Why did you think you would be rejected? Why else? Renato awkwardly smiled, trailing away the end of his words. Louis could deduce the answer from that smile and frowned. He hated Renato's self-blame or self-deprecation because of his trait. What's wrong with being a beta? I told you over and over already, right? Your trait is by no means a flaw. It's not because of my trait, but my situation. Even the Grand Prince would know how I am treated, if he hears bad things because of me. What are you worrying about? I'm sure he accepted it despite knowing that as well. Is that so? Of course. And what will happen if you already show a weak appearance like this? You said you need the Grand Prince's power to protect His Imperial Highness Trudy, right? Then please don't worry about what goes on behind the scenes or whether he is getting into gossip, and just work hard. That's right. Renato's face darkened when Louis spoke sternly, just like a teacher who scolded a child. As Louis said, Khalid was essential to his plan. It was also true that in order to confront Marquis Metis, he must use everything he had. However, when things went according to his intentions, he felt anxious about whether it would turn out well, and guilty about whether this was the right thing to do. He lacked confidence because he had never succeeded in anything until now. How are you going to get through this difficult world? Louis looked at Renato with his shoulders drooping and clicked his tongue internally. He already guessed this since yesterday, but the tender-hearted Prince Nim seemed to feel guilty for bringing Khalid into his scheme. Indeed, he didn't fit well in the Imperial Palace, where all kinds of conspiracies and veiled enmities were taking place every day. If you have made up your mind to do this, please don't be swayed, Your Imperial Highness. If you hesitate, things that were supposed to be good will not work. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. If you can't do it, please just stop now. You can do so because we haven't even started properly yet. Louis held Renato's shoulders with both hands and looked at him, giving advice more seriously than ever. In the 20 years since he entered the Imperial Palace with his mother, who became the prince's nanny, he had been with Renato and had seen many things that he had never seen before. So he was worried. Having personally experienced how shady politics was and how terrible power was, he both understood and didn't understand why his Prince Nim, who was already struggling enough, was walking down an even more thorny path now. He decided to support him because it was something Renato really wanted, or else he would have stopped him. I also like His Imperial Highness Prince Trudy, but the most important person to me is Renato Nim. So if you are tired, you can stop here. At the words full of worry and concern, the violet eyes shook like fluttering petals. Renato slightly moved his lips, perhaps not knowing what to say, then let out an awkward soft laugh. Sorry, it seems that I showed weakness again. You're right, I haven't even started properly yet, so I can't be like this already. I'll pull myself together. You thought well. Louis confirmed that hesitation had disappeared from Renato's face and gently curled his eyes. He always thought that it was a mystery how such a kind and gentle person could have come out of the vicious Blanche's belly. I'll just add one more word. Your Imperial Highness, you need to be a little brazen. Just look at Marquis Metis. How thick is his skin? I'm not saying you should be like him, but you have to be more determined than you are right now. Do you understand? I got it. Now then, shall we prepare for the banquet? Louis let go of the hands that were holding Renato's shoulders and clapped once to change the heavy atmosphere. Are you preparing for the banquet already? If you want to escort the Grand Prince, we'll only have barely enough time even if we prepare right from this moment. So please get up now. To decide what clothes to wear to the banquet, you have to try them on one by one. I was in a hurry to prepare, so I could only complete 3 sets. Louis clicked his tongue in regret. He originally had to make about 5 or 6 sets and choose from there, but time was too short. Fortunately, he could obtain these sets by pestering the Imperial seamstresses every day. Chapter 13. You have to try on all 3 sets of clothes, so let's hurry up. I'm going to pick up some accessories from the merchant guilds that transacted with the Imperial family in the afternoon as well. Before that, We have to decide what clothes to wear so that I can choose accessories that suit them. I don't think that's necessary. What are you even saying? I'm going to dress you up to the fullest. I will make sure no one says strange things when they see you, Your Imperial Highness. Louis clenched his fists with a grim expression like a knight going to a duel. He planned to put great effort into dressing Renato up so that he would stand out more than anyone else in the banquet hall. Before that, can I just go and see Trudy for a bit? His Imperial Highness Trudy, now, yes, we haven't seen each other since the funeral, right? So we decided to have tea together today. Renato looked at Louis and muttered. After thinking for a while, Louis let out a sigh, thinking he could not help it. I think it will be fine if you visit him for a while. Really? Yes. Instead, please come back by noon. Thanks. I will be back soon. Renato's face brightened and he stood up. When he was about to leave right away, Louis hurriedly grabbed the signal rope. Please wait a minute, Your Imperial Highness. I'll call Luna right now. It's okay. I can go alone. It's just a step away. Absolutely not. Don't you know the saying that the bottom of the oil lamp is always dark? You have to be careful anytime, anywhere. Louis drew a decisive line saying that he should never move alone, then strongly pulled the rope once. Then, Luna, who was guarding the door, came in immediately. What's the matter? What else? I need you to escort His Imperial Highness. He will go to His Imperial Highness, Prince Trudy's palace now. What about you? Aren't you going with us? I have to prepare for the banquet. I can't entrust something like this to anyone else. Hearing Louis's answer, Luna squinted one eye. The two, who believed in no one but each other, were in charge of Renato's matters. In the first place, there was a chronic shortage of manpower here, so if they didn't do so, the palace would not function properly. Currently, the staff of the first prince's palace consisted of Louis the chief attendant, Luna the exclusive guard, the chef, the coachman, and a dozen other palace servants. For a palace where the prince of the empire resided, the manpower was too shabby. This was because there would be no way that the palace servants would want to work in the palace of a prince who was in the blind spot of power. Even the empress, the ruler of the inner palace, was providing only minimal support to Renato. Should they consider it a fortunate thing that, at least, there were no palace servants who worked as Blanche's eyes and ears? In the past, there were several palace servants who worked as the empress informants, but thanks to Louis and Luna's constant search and expulsion, there was no one now. Blanche, who was constantly monitoring Renato, stopped sending new people as soon as Tristan became ill and Ludmilla was also on the verge of death. Over the years, his self-confidence had skyrocketed, and he seemed to be conceited that he could control Renato as he pleased. Marquis Metis still seemed to suspect that Renato might have different intentions, but he did not actively monitor him. That was because he couldn't afford to care about Renato when his influence in politics was growing. Thanks to that, Renato had been able to enjoy some freedom over the past few years, such as visiting Ludmilla or going to see Trudy without the two of them knowing. Their carelessness and arrogance only benefited Renato. Don't call the carriage. It hasn't been long since I had breakfast, so I'll walk to help digestion. I want to think quietly too. Understood. Renato put on a cardigan and left the palace with Luna. Trudy's palace and Renato's palace were next to each other with a garden in between. Chirp chirp. Renato walked along the promenade in the garden, listening to the birds chirping. The familiar road that he could walk on even with closed eyes was the only passage between Renato's palace and Trudy's palace. It was here that he first met Ludmilla. A faint smile appeared on Renato's lips as he recalled the old memories. It was now called the Second Prince's Palace, but not long ago, that place was Ludmilla's palace. Renato's eyes became filled with nostalgia as he looked at the palace covered with pine vines boasting greenery even in winter. Oh my, what a cute young Master Nim. How did you get here? One day, when a rumor struck the empire's capital that the emperor had brought a beautiful Omega woman together with him after an inspection in the central region, young Renato ran into Ludmilla, who was lost while taking a walk as usual. Renato L. Fleuret, ah, you are His Imperial Highness. Oh my, please forgive my rudeness. My name is Ludmilla Bloom. The blonde-haired beauty with pointy ears did not frown or sneer at Renato. Rather, she approached him with a smile as bright as the sun. It was quite strange. It was the first time someone heard his name and smiled. You asked why my ears are so pointy. It's because I'm an elf. Elf, the forest guardian clan that is a distant relative of fairies. That's right, I belong to that forest guardian clan. These ears are elves' characteristics. They look strange, right? Would you like to touch them? It's all right, here. Ludmilla gladly lowered her head so that Renato could look closely at her ears. Not stopping there, she took Renato's hand without hesitation, a hand that neither his mother, Blanche, nor his father, Tristan, would hold. Ah, did I surprise you? I'm really sorry. Renato was greatly startled when she held his hand without hesitation. Seeing the stiffened child, Ludmilla immediately apologized. You are so cute and pretty, so I made a mistake, Your Imperial Highness. Can you forgive me? I'm cute. Renato's eyes widened because of the words he had never heard in his life. After only experiencing people who busily looked at him with a frown every time, or avoided him as if they didn't want to be in the same space with him, this was the first time someone praised him as cute and pretty with a big smile. Yes, you are super cute, the prettiest child I've ever seen. Your hair is also shiny. May I try stroking your hair if you are okay with it, Your Imperial Highness? The child hesitated for a moment, then slightly nodded his head. Ludmilla, who had obtained his bashful permission, stretched out her hand, not missing the opportunity. Renato involuntarily shrank his shoulders and tightly closed his eyes the moment Ludmilla's hand came into his vision. He knew that Ludmilla wasn't trying to hit him, but his body reacted first. Renato, who had reflexively closed his eyes, soon opened his eyes again when he felt a gentle touch on his hair. Wow, it's so soft. Just like a doll. Ludmilla let out her admiration and stroked Renato's hair. Her eyes resembling the fresh green of summer gleamed with joy. Her smile made the child's stiffened body relax again. Because he realized that Ludmilla was being sincere. We met again, Your Imperial Highness. You are so lovely today as well. It was a few days later that Renato and Ludmilla met again. Renato was formally invited to Ludmilla's palace where she was appointed as the imperial consort. When he came to meet her in person, she smiled brightly with the same expression just like when they first met. Lovely, you don't feel bad when you see me. Feel bad, me? Why? Last time you said so as well, but why do you think so? Because I'm a beta. Why does it matter that you are a beta? Ludmilla tilted her head with a face saying she didn't understand. Renato hesitated, unable to answer. How could he say that? The fact that he was being looked down on by everyone because he was a beta who did not have the right to the throne. As his adorable lips closed shut like a clam, Ludmilla turned her gaze to the attendant who was quietly listening to their conversation behind. The attendant was at a loss when seeing her eyes, asking for an explanation, then hesitantly approached. Your Highness, please excuse me for a moment. The attendant bowed down and briefly whispered about Renato's situation to Ludmilla's ear. Renato lowered his head when the attendant's voice occasionally came into his ears. The child thought that Ludmilla would drive him out as soon as she finished listening to the explanation. However, Ludmilla's reaction was different this time as well. Oh my word, discriminating against people based on their traits. Elves or the Empire are all the same. Upon learning about Renato's story, Ludmilla was very indignant. After talking to herself in incomprehensible words out of anger, she grabbed Renato's hand. Your Imperial Highness, please listen carefully. You didn't do anything wrong. So please don't act like a sinner. Excuse me, but the bad ones are the people who made evil laws to discriminate against betas and point their finger at you, Your Imperial Highness. To torment a child like this when you are adults, such nasty humans. Ludmilla became more emotional and burst into anger. Renato blankly stared at her when she was angry as if it was her own matter. Then, his face contorted. I didn't do anything wrong. With those words, tears welled up in his eyes. It was a phrase he often heard from his nanny and the Lewis siblings, but it had never touched his heart. However, strangely, Ludmilla's words pierced his heart. Perhaps it was because she was a perfect stranger. Because she was not affected by prejudice, did not make political calculations, was not swayed by affection like his nanny and the Lewis siblings, and just saw Renato as Renato himself. Chapter 14. Just receiving love isn't even enough, how hard must it have been for you? Ludmilla sorrowfully looked at the teary Renato and gently embraced him. Suddenly held in Ludmilla's arms, Renato took a deep breath. It was the first time he was hugged by someone in this way except for his nanny and the Lewis siblings. It's all right, everything's all right. You aren't bad at all, Your Imperial Highness. Pat. Her warm hand gently caressed the small, thin back, her tender words of comfort gently permeating his ears. In front of the soft touch just like the warm spring sun, the child's vigilance, which remained till now, disappeared like snow melting. At the same time, The tears that had been welling up in his eyes began to flow down. He couldn't hold back his tears any longer. Hic. As if to express all the sorrow that had piled up in his chest, a sad cry came out from his small lips. Renato burst into tears in Ludmila's embrace. His trembling hand tightly gripped the hem of Ludmila's clothes. Ludmila firmly hugged the trembling little body until Renato stopped crying. Just like how a mother bird embraced her baby bird. After that, Ludmila often invited Renato to her palace. Blanche was dissatisfied with their relationship, but he was forced to back down when Tristan gave Renato an imperial order to help Ludmila adapt to the imperial palace. As he spent time with Ludmila, Renato smiled more often. The kind and beautiful woman gave Renato a lot of things. And one of them was his reconciliation with Tristan. He didn't know what kind of magic she had used, but Renato received a formal apology from Tristan. A single word of apology couldn't restore the father and son's relationship where both of them were so distanced apart, but it was still much better than before. Your Imperial Highness, may I call you by your name? One spring day, when Ludmila's belly was carrying a new life, she expressed her wish to become closer to Renato. When an imperial family member allowed another person to call them by their name, it also meant that they had accepted that person as their family. Because of that, Ludmila had no choice but to be cautious. Without hesitation, Renato gave Ludmila permission to use his name. Renato didn't express it, but he also wanted her to call him by his first name. Renato. As soon as the child granted his permission, Ludmila smiled with the happiest expression in the world and spread her arms wide. Renato was drawn to her arms just like a magnet. Thank you as always, Renato. Ludmila, who gladly gave her arms to the child, whispered her thanks. Hearing her voice filled with affection, Renato instantly had a strange feeling. He felt delighted and sad, happy but also an urge to cry. Me too. Renato expressed his gratitude to Ludmila, suppressing his complicated feelings. She wasn't the one that should have said thanks, rather, it should have been him. Had he not met Ludmila, he would not have known this kind of happiness until his death. I wish you were my real mother. Hearing the clear and warm voice calling his name, Renato had that wish. His heart was filled with a hunger for affection and a desire to be Ludmila's real child. Congratulations, Your Majesty. Her Highness has just given birth to a prince. One morning when the weather was warm unlike winter, Ludmila gave birth to Trudy after a difficult childbirth. The birth of an alpha prince that everyone had been waiting for was congratulated with joy in all palaces, except for the Empress Palace. The day after the childbirth, Renato went to visit Ludmila with a nervous face. Yesterday, when Blanche heard the news that Ludmila's child was an alpha, he threw a teacup against the wall and made a fuss. And then, perhaps because his anger could not be resolved, he began to lash out at Renato. Renato's face darkened when he remembered what had happened with Blanche. He was worried that Ludmila might not welcome him just like how she did before. An alpha baby was born, so maybe. Renato struggled to suppress the anxiety that was rising over and over again. His heart pounded as he got closer to Ludmila's palace. Please greet him, Renato. His name is Trudy. Fortunately, Ludmila warmly welcomed Renato. Then she introduced the sleeping Trudy in her arms to Renato. Now Renato is going to be a hung. Here, please say hello to your younger brother. My younger brother. Renato gently stroked the soft cheek with a careful touch. Then the baby twitched and softly smiled. At that moment, Renato fell in love. Hung. Trudy, who greatly resembled Ludmila, followed Renato very obediently. Renato also cherished Trudy like his real brother. The two got along very well, unlike other half-brothers. It's all because of you. If you hadn't been born as a beta, there would have been no reason for that pointy-eared to become the imperial consort. You ruined everything. Since Trudy's birth, Ludmila's position was greatly strengthened. And accordingly, Blanche's annoyance also increased. He would call Renato from time to vent his anger. Marquis Metis was not as angry with Renato as Blanche was. Instead, he used Renato to dig up information about Tristan and Ludmila. Renato suffered from those two's harassment on a daily basis. Sometimes, Maximo also joined in and bullied him. Still, it was the happiest time in Renato's life. Something has happened. Her Highness the Imperial Consort has collapsed. The misfortune came unannounced. Ludmila, who was nursing Tristan when he suffered from his injuries' aftereffects, suddenly vomited blood and collapsed. Although she was thoroughly treated by several palace doctors, and even the imperial elixir, Fairy's Tears, was used on her, Ludmila hardly showed any improvement. The palace doctors could not determine the exact cause of Ludmila's disease. After long discussions, Ludmila was diagnosed with a rare disease of unknown cause. The reason why fairies' tears didn't work was that she was an elf who was a distant relative of fairies. There were people that questioned their diagnosis and raised a poisoning conspiracy theory, but the investigation found nothing suspicious. Whatever the truth was, it was clear that Ludmila had an incurable disease. When Tristan collapsed and even Ludmila became bedridden, Blanche's power naturally increased. Marquis Metis did not miss the opportunity and expanded his power by converting the nobles to his side. Now, stop caring about the imperial consort and the second prince. Blanche ordered Renato not to visit Ludmila and Trudy anymore. But Renato couldn't stay still. Once in a while, he went to visit Ludmila while avoiding Blanche and Marquis Metis' eyes. It was Renato's first rebellion. When Blanche found out about it after a while, he became very angry and locked Renato in his palace. Fortunately, with Tristan's help, he was able to meet the two of them about twice a month, but more than that was impossible because of the confinement order from Blanche. It has been 2 years since the imperial consort collapsed. Why doesn't she die like this? Shish, please be quiet. What if someone hears you? Do you think it's easy to poison slowly so that no poison is detected in the test? I know that, but I'll take care of the imperial consort, so please just focus on increasing your influence in the imperial palace and the social circle, Your Majesty. It was a coincidence that Renato knew the truth behind Ludmila's illness. When he mustered up his courage and went to the Empress Palace to ask for the release of the confinement order that had been extended for over a year, he overheard a secret conversation between Blanche and Marquis Metis. When Renato came to know the terrible truth, he fled as if running away. He was in deep despair. Even if he didn't like Blanche and Marquis Metis, nonetheless, they were his mother and maternal grandfather that gave birth to him. He was even more shocked because he had once longed for their affection. Who should he tell this to? The Emperor, the palace doctors, Ludmila, Louis and Luna. Crushed by the weight of the truth beyond his control, Renato struggled alone for days. He thought he should reveal the evil deeds of Blanche and Marquis Metis, but he didn't know who to tell this to. At first, he of course planned to talk to Tristan. He was the most powerful person that Renato could rely on. But when he planned to tell Tristan, he couldn't find the courage. He wasn't sure if Tristan would accept him, who was also Blanche's child, once the man knew the truth. He was also reluctant to speak to Ludmila's palace doctors. Her doctors and attendants were chosen by Tristan himself. Nevertheless, the fact that she continued to be poisoned also meant that there was a traitor among them. Chapter 15. It was even more impossible to consult with Louis and Luna. This was because his nanny, who learned of Blanche's evil deeds in the past, lost her life while trying to protect Renato. Therefore, he didn't want to lose them either. Above all, there was no evidence to accuse Blanche and Marquis Metis. Would people really believe him if he testified that he heard their conversation? No way. Renato's face was stained with deep despair. No one would listen to him. In this imperial palace, Renato was alive, but not alive. A sidekick prince that no one would care about. I'm sorry, Ludmila Nim. I'm really sorry. Not knowing what to do, Renato eventually went to find Ludmila. And he lay down in front of her and wept, begging for forgiveness. I see. So it was poison. Surprised by his sudden visit, Ludmila helplessly reacted to the story that Renato told in tears. Exhausted from the struggle against an illness of unknown cause for a long time, she had long lost her former cheerfulness and enthusiasm. What should I do? I'll go tell Imperial Father now. Please don't. There's no solid evidence, right? And even in the periodic tests, no poison was detected. Ludmila tried to grasp the situation as calmly as possible. However, it was not as easy as she thought. Even the smallest conversation would make her out of breath, and the slightest thought would make her dizzy. We don't know who the traitor is, so, let's move carefully. If we do it wrong, we'll all be in danger. It had been 5 years since Tristan was injured, and nearly 2 years since she collapsed. Ludmila knew that in the last few years, the scales of power had clearly tilted toward Marquis Metis. More than half of the imperial palace was also controlled by Blanche. It was clear that there would be a backlash if they moved hastily. Then, it's already, too late now. First of all, I will tell His Majesty tomorrow. And, Ludmila Nim, I'm okay, Is it already too late? Feeling blood rushing up in her throat, Ludmilla could sense her death. She didn't even have time to know the truth. What should I do? I'll call the palace doctors right now. No, hic. Surprised when seeing her handkerchief dyed red, Renato tried to call the palace doctors. Then he soon realized that there was a potential traitor among them and cried, not knowing what to do. Renato. Ludmilla, who once again vomited a lump of dark red blood, called out to Renato while breathing heavily. It wouldn't be strange even if she stopped breathing right now. If I die, Renato, I'm sorry to put a heavy burden on you, but I entrust Trudy to you. Please protect that child. No, I can't. Please don't entrust that to me. Ludmilla Nim will not die. So please, please don't say that, Renato shook his head and grabbed the end of Ludmilla's sleeve. The mere thought of her death made it difficult for him to breathe. I have one wish before I die. A hand as thin as a withered branch covered the back of Renato's hand. Renato's tear-stained face was captured in her eyes, which had become as murky as dried leaves. Sensing that her death was near, Ludmilla spoke out loud what she had longed for. Just once, will you call me mother? Mother. Renato's body stiffened with that word. He blankly stared at Ludmilla like someone that had lost his mind. He couldn't believe what he had heard. I've been, thinking about it before, how great it would be if I were Renato's real mother. After barely finishing her words, Ludmilla faintly smiled. Renato didn't answer right away. Her words saying that she wanted to be his mother were so dreamlike that they didn't feel real. Ludmilla and Trudy were already Renato's precious family. However, once in a while, Renato felt a strange distance from them. Of course, the two didn't draw a line against Renato. However, there was a special bond between Ludmilla and Trudy. A bond that only a mother and her son could have. When Tristan was together with them, the sense of alienation that Renato felt grew even greater. He felt as if he was a stone that obstructed the already perfect family of the three of them, Tristan, Ludmilla, and Trudy. Even among them, he was a sidekick. So he had hoped. He hoped that he could become one true family member with his loved ones, and that he could be together with them rather than being alone. I also want to call you mother. Renato, unable to continue speaking, lowered his head. His real mother, Blanche, killed Ludmilla, so how could he call Ludmilla his mother? I'd like to hear it at least once, can't I? Ludmilla, as always, reached out to the hesitant Renato first. Hearing her request, Renato silently moved his lips. He repeatedly let out some sounds that didn't make sense from his mouth. Mo. Finally, a terribly muffled voice came out from his quivering lips. It was more of a sob than a word. His throat, clogged with tears, couldn't make a proper word. Mo, there, huff, mo, there, mother, mother, After several attempts, Renato was barely able to properly pronounce the word, mother. With that, his tears flowed down. Mother, Renato sorrowfully sobbed while holding the thin hand. The moment he had longed for had arrived, but he was not happy at all. Thank you, Renato, for granting my wish. Ludmilla smiled with genuine joy. Her face, pale without a single hint of blood, brightened like a flower in full bloom after a long time. In the next world, will you really be born as my child? Yes, yes. I'll be born, as mother's child, Yes, let's see each other again. My pretty son. A faint warmth touched his cheeks along with a sigh-like murmur. At that moment, Renato realized. To Ludmilla, he was already her son just like Trudy. I'm sorry, I'm not good enough, even though I wanted to put a bright smile on your face. Ludmilla inwardly continued the sentence in her mind. The boy's face, which was gloomy unlike a child's when they first met, was still wet with tears even though he had already become a young man. She felt a deep regret as she stroked the wet cheeks. Her hand was shaking so much that it was difficult to even wipe the tears away. Reaching her final limit, she squeezed her last strength and opened her mouth. You must be happy, Renato. With those words, Ludmilla became unconscious. That was the last conversation Renato had with Ludmilla. She fell into a coma and never regained consciousness again. And a month later, she passed away. Renato hung Nim. Trudy. Renato, who was engulfed in sad thoughts, stood still when hearing the voice calling out to him. Trudy came running towards him in the misty scenery. As he walked in thought, he seemed to have arrived at Trudy's palace. It's been a while, Hung Nim. I really missed you. Trudy rushed into Renato's arms and tightly hugged him just like an energetic calf. As he laughed and raised his head, Trudy noticed something, his eyes turning round. Hung Nim, did you cry? No, I didn't. Why would I cry? It's because the sun is too bright. Renato finally realized his condition, awkwardly smiled and wiped the corner of his eyes with his hand. Whenever he recalled the memories related to Ludmilla, tears would come out like this. Really, if His Majesty the Empress is angry again because you come to see me, then… Trudy, who seemed as if he was about to burst into tears at any moment, slurred the end of his sentence. The small hand tightly gripped Renato's cardigan. It won't happen. Renato gently stroked Trudy's anxious cheek, calming him down. Tears welled up in his eyes again because of the soft touch on his fingertips and the soft warmth that permeated his skin. Yes, this is not the time to be foolishly hesitant. He had to do anything for this child, even if it was cowardly taking advantage of others. Renato once again strengthened his resolve that had just become weak, gave strength to the corners of his lips and smiled as softly as possible. The smile made Trudy's face brighten with relief. It's cold, so let's go inside. I have a lot to tell you. Yes, Hung Nim. Trudy grabbed Renato's hand with excitement. Renato felt determined by the small warmth clinging to him. Sidekick Prince. Chapter 16. 2. The Prince's Proposal. Phew, you look great today. Omegaverse whistled when he saw Khalid ready to attend the banquet. Khalid was originally a tall and handsome man, but when he neatly combed one side of his hair and put on glamorous clothes and accessories, he looked even more gorgeous and handsome than usual. After all, people have to be handsome to be noticed. Our Grand Prince will definitely make many Omegas in the Empire shed tears sooner or later. Isn't that right? Omegaverse admired Khalid's appearance once more, smiled and tapped on Nasir's shoulder with his elbow. Nasir held back his desire to yell at Omegaverse to say nice words and walked over to Khalid. Your Highness, the watch's repair is completed. Only now. It took longer than I thought. It is a special watch, so it seems that it took some time to restore and repair so that it wouldn't affect the spell. Would you like to check it out now? Give it to me. Here it is. Dame Alia said that there are no curses or suspicious traces. The protective spell still remains. Is that so? Khalid listened to Nasir's explanation and opened the leather box carrying the watch. The softly shining pocket watch was neatly repaired as if it had never been broken. Khalid's face lit up after confirming that the watch had completely regained its former appearance. The reason why the watch suddenly broke will forever remain a mystery. Ah, right, have you had any nightmares since that day? Dame Alia told me to ask you. I haven't, and it wasn't a nightmare. It was just a sad dream. But that's a nightmare. No, it didn't feel like a nightmare. It felt like I was missing something. Khalid denied Nasir's words and traced his faint memories. The scene he had seen in his dream faded away and disappeared just like a mirage, but only the tingling sensation he felt at that time was still clear. As if it was reality and not a dream. What was it? The red eyes looking down at the pocket watch in his hand became thoughtful. When he recalled his forgotten dream, his heart pounded in a strange rhythm. Khalid fidgeted with his pocket watch with a strange feeling. At that moment, he heard a voice announcing Renato's arrival. Your Highness, His Imperial Highness has arrived. Should I take him inside? Already. When the steward said to him, Khalid checked the watch in his hand. The prince arrived much earlier than their appointment time. I will go out right now. Khalid put the watch in his jacket pocket and went outside. Now that his preparations were complete, he decided that it was better for him to leave than to bring Renato, an outsider, in. Come to think of it, did that person look like the prince? That sudden thought made Khalid pause his steps. He couldn't remember the face of the person in that dream, but that person's aura was strangely similar to Renato's. A sense of crisis as if he would weakly collapse if held incorrectly, or crumble down just like dry petals. Khalid quietly murmured, recalling the impression he felt from Renato yesterday. Maybe it was because of that dream that he felt a sense of déjà vu when seeing Renato. Just thinking about it made him feel strange. He didn't like the fact that a dream he had almost a month ago was still affecting him. Tisk. Khalid became restless for no reason, clicked his tongue and speeded up his steps. When coming out of the official residence, he saw a carriage with florid imperial family's insignia and Renato waiting for him in front of it. Khalid inadvertently stopped walking. Renato was blankly standing while looking at the sunset sky. His face, tinted with the reddish sunlight, felt more lively than yesterday, but strangely gloomy. A dark shadow was cast over the amethyst-like eyes beneath his silver hair. Perhaps because of his sorrowful atmosphere, the tear mole located under one corner of his eyes, which felt more droopy than yesterday, seemed to stand out more. Again, in an instant, Khalid felt a strange déjà vu again. He must have seen a similar scene like this one day in the past. His eyebrows narrowed because of unknown anxiety, and his right eye twitched. At that moment, Renato, sensing the presence of another person, turned his head. The violet-colored eyes that saw Khalid slightly widened before curling up into a beautiful shape. "Good afternoon, Your Highness, Grand Prince Khalid. Did you have a good rest yesterday? Thanks to you, I was able to rest well, Your Imperial Highness. I heard that you rearranged the banquet schedule to today even though it was supposed to be held yesterday so that I could rest. Thank you for your concern." Staring at Renato, who was smiling softly, his red eyes momentarily flickered. Khalid quickly fixed his gaze and brusquely greeted Renato. "It's nothing, you must have been tired from coming to the Empire, so I just thought you should rest for a day or so. By the way, you look very wonderful today. I was dressed to fit in the banquet, but I don't know if it's okay or not. I prepared in a hurry, so there are a lot of things that are lacking. I think you don't have to worry at all. It's more than just fine because you look very splendid," Renato said with sincerity. If Khalid gave off a wild feeling yesterday, he had a graceful and refined elegance today. "Thank you for saying so. You are also very beautiful today, Your Imperial Highness." "Pardon me, quote ellipsis question mark. Yes, should I have said that he looked splendid or cool?" Khalid wondered if he had made a mistake when he saw Renato's bewildered expression after hearing his words. But he was just saying what he genuinely felt. Renato's style was more elegant and beautiful than cool and handsome. "Are you offended by what I said?" Not at all. I wasn't offended at all. It's just that, it's an embarrassing thing to say, but I'm not used to compliments. My apologies for the strange reaction." Renato's voice became smaller. Khalid would have only said that he was beautiful out of politeness without any other meaning, but his heart trembled for no reason. "What?" Khalid slightly frowned when seeing Renato lower his eyes, embarrassed when hearing his praise. He just casually praised others just a while ago, but when he received another person's goodwill, he reacted unfamiliarly with it and showed weakness. He already vaguely felt this yesterday as well, but the prince in front of him seemed to have no confidence in himself at all. It wasn't only that, in Khalid's eyes, Renato was not good at dealing with people, hiding his emotions, and controlling his facial expressions. It seemed that he tried to manage his facial expressions in his own way, but his emotions were still obvious. How can he survive like that? Khalid unconsciously clicked his tongue inwardly. He felt anxious as if seeing a child by the seashore all by himself. "I have to escort you, Your Highness, so I took greater care compared to usual. I'm glad that you like it. Come to think of it, I forgot to say thanks. Thank you very much for accepting my request." Renato spoke in a soft voice, rubbing his burning cheeks with his hand. Khalid's gaze reached the cheeks redder than the sunset for a moment, then directed away. "I'm the one that should say thanks. If you had not paid attention, I would have attended the banquet alone without a partner, Your Imperial Highness." "How can that be?" Hearing Khalid's words, Renato put on an expression saying that would never happen. In his previous life, Khalid attended the welcome banquet with a beautiful Omega. Renato could not attend Khalid's welcome banquet at the time, but he remembered it clearly because his Omega partner was a shaman that was rare to see in the Empire, and they became a hot topic in the social circle. Even after that, Khalid had that Omega accompany him as his partner to banquets and events that he had to attend as a diplomatic ambassador. Then, at some point, he started going alone without a partner. People used to gossip about that, saying that he didn't have formality and etiquette. Was it Dame Alia? Renato searched through his faint memories and recalled the name of the Omega who was Khalid's partner. If he hadn't seized the opportunity today, she would probably have attended the banquet with Khalid this time as well. Renato felt a little sorry for the one who was originally Khalid's partner. "Then, please take care of me today. I may be clumsy because I have lived a life far from banquets." "Ah, yes." A large hand suddenly appeared in front of Renato, who was lost in thought. Khalid was asking for a handshake. It was then that Renato realized that he had been in a daze in front of Khalid again, and hurriedly held his hand. "I don't go to banquets often either. However, I will do my best to avoid any inconvenience. Shall we go then?" Renato carefully grabbed Khalid's hand and led him toward the carriage. Khalid obediently followed Renato into the carriage. He suddenly had a useless thought that it would be more natural for him to escort Renato instead. Chapter 17. Less than translated at Blessed Empyrean WordPress. Greater than. This is so tiring. Khalid barely escaped from the crowd and emptied his glass with an exhausted face. He greeted the people who talked to him with curious expressions and had formal chats dozens of times to the point that his body heated up. Maybe because he was smiling the whole time, his cheekbones and lips felt sore. Wiping his lips with his hand, Khalid quietly looked around the banquet hall. He could feel the gazes watching his every movement. They were trying to judge whether the Grand Prince who came as the new diplomatic ambassador would be of political help to them. Perhaps because it was the first time he showed his face before his official appointment, most of them had favorable gazes, but there were also some gazes containing vigilance or malice. They were likely to be the people Khalid had encountered on the battlefield or heard of his notoriety. Apart from that, there were quite a few people who were interested in the situation itself. It was because of Renato, Khalid's banquet partner today. What is his relationship with His Imperial Highness? I saw earlier that they seem quite close. Close? The two of them must have met for the first time yesterday, right? They are just being polite to each other. It might have been different if His Imperial Highness were an Omega, but why would a dominant Alpha get close to a Beta? Isn't it just because His Majesty the Empress ordered him to escort the Grand Prince? Because he's a precious guest, it's just right to have a partner who is worthy of the standard. Or is it some kind of protocol? After all, he's the special protocol officer. Khalid held back a sigh when he heard the constant murmuring about him and Renato. He thought they should at least quiet their voices down if they wanted to talk about other people, and wondered if they were deliberately doing so for everyone else to hear. No, it wasn't because of them, but himself. The senses built up after rolling on the battlefield made Khalid more vigilant toward his surroundings. His five senses, which were more sensitive than others, could feel the gazes in close proximity, the small whispers, and even the pheromones that flowed out with secret movements and subtle seductions. This is why I don't want to come. Khalid clicked his tongue internally and scattered away the strange pheromones that had been clinging to him. There was a brief stop when the music performance started, but if there was any gap, a lot of people around him would rush over like a herd of wild dogs. Where did he go? In this kind of situation, all he needed was his partner. Khalid looked around to find Renato, who had gone away. Renato, who had been next to him just until a while ago, disappeared after barely greeting the nobles attending the banquet, saying that he had some work to do. However, Khalid knew that Renato wasn't busy doing something. He left for Khalid's own good. The gazes of the nobles looking at the two of them together were not kind. While conversing with the nobles, Khalid got a glimpse of how Renato was treated in the empire. He had heard from Nasir in advance, but Renato's situation was much worse than he had expected. The nobles skillfully and boldly disregarded Renato. They greeted Renato with courtesy, but that was all. People didn't even look at Renato during their entire conversations with Khalid. He was treated like a perfectly invisible human being. Renato didn't show any reaction, perhaps familiar with people's attitudes. He just quietly smiled, introduced Khalid when a new noble approached him, and just stood there like a doll until the conversation was over. His mother, the Empress, also disregarded Renato in the same way. The Empress, who attended the banquet on behalf of the sick emperor, warmly welcomed Khalid. However, he only gave Renato a brief greeting. It was a blatantly cold attitude. When recalling what had happened a while ago, Khalid felt his stomach become uncomfortable. For some reason, Renato's appearance today reminded him of himself in the past. Every time he attended the royal banquets with Mariam, he could feel the gaze, contempt, and disregard. This is not good. For a moment, Khalid felt a strange sense of crisis. He continued to care about the prince whom he had only met for 2 days. This was never a good sign. Tisk. Khalid found Renato without difficulty and slightly clicked his tongue. Renato was stuck in the corner of the banquet hall just like someone that played hide and seek. It seemed that he was being considerate so that Khalid could have comfortable conversations with other people, but that place wasn't a suitable place for a prince at all. There is no need for unnecessary consideration. Khalid muttered to himself and moved his steps. Renato seemed to think he wouldn't be noticed if he hid like that, but unfortunately, he was wrong. There were already several people who recognized him, glanced at him, and whispered amongst themselves. Frankly speaking, Renato didn't have the kind of face that would fall out of sight just because he hid in a corner. He also had a unique aura reminiscent of flowers, perhaps because of his thick fairy blood. As he approached Renato, Khalid found someone together with Renato and frowned. He couldn't see before because of the crowd, but there was already a guest that came before him. Who? Renato leaned against the wall of the banquet hall and let out a weary breath. Perhaps because he was nervous and moving around all day, his body felt heavy. Let's take a break and then go back. After seeing Khalid talking to someone, Renato moved his hand to call an attendant. When he took a sip of the cool and sweet fruit wine, his fatigue seemed to be relieved a little. He emptied his glass at once and looked around the noisy banquet hall with fatigued eyes. He expected this and was determined to do this, but it was hard. Should I eat something? Renato estimated when the banquet would end and briefly looked for something to fill his stomach. He had been starving since daytime to prepare for the banquet, so he now felt a bit of a stomach ache. So you were here. What are you doing in the corner? When Renato picked up a small cookie to soothe his empty stomach, a shadow casted over his head along with an unwelcome voice. Lord Maximo, why is he here? Seeing the unexpected appearance of a person, Renato's face became a little perplexed. In his previous life, Maximo was in charge of Khalid's protocol, but he did not attend the welcome banquet. So he thought the man would of course not attend this time as well. What is that expression? Did I come to a place I shouldn't have come? It's not that, but, you didn't say you were going to the banquet. I was curious about the Grand Prince in the rumors, so I visited. And isn't this a banquet I was supposed to attend? Until someone else took away my job. Maximo crossed his arms and smirked, his lips twisting up. Facing that absurd attitude, Renato gave him a dumbfounded look. Why are you being sarcastic all of a sudden? Didn't you like this because you wouldn't have to do anything bothersome? At first I did feel so, but the more I think about it, the stranger it becomes. It's also a little bit annoying. Maximo glanced toward Khalid for a brief moment. The neat forehead mercilessly frowned as if he had seen something unpleasant. He immediately leaned his upper body toward Renato and asked in a low, subdued voice. What is your intention? Intention? You think I don't know? The Marquis and His Majesty the Empress seem to think that this happened because of His Majesty the Emperor's interference on a whim, but I don't think so. Did you cause this? His eyes narrowed into a horizontal line and turned sharp. At his keen question, Renato's lavender-colored eyes slightly fluttered for a moment, but he retorted with strength in his voice. It's an absurd guess. Do you think I have the power to move His Majesty the Emperor? You two can't have a bad relationship because you go to greet him frequently, don't you? Who knows what the two of you were planning there? It was because of His Majesty the Empress' wish that I visit His Majesty the Emperor. And I always report back every time. Don't uselessly slander me, Renato said in a cold voice. Maximo's face flushed red when hearing his irrefutable remark. What? Useless slander? I uselessly slandered you. So is it not true, then? It's not as if you didn't know the relationship between their majesties or what kind of situation is unfolding, yet you are saying some nonsensical things right now. Renato responded to Maximo without losing. Tristan and Blanche did not have a good relationship from the beginning, but their relationship irreparably deteriorated due to Ludmilla's appointment as the imperial consort and Trudy's birth. And when Marquis Metis revealed his hidden ambitions, the two became even further apart. After Tristan became ill with the aftereffects of his injury, the two did not meet in private unless they were to perform official duties or attend events together as the Emperor and Empress. To be more exact, Tristan seemed to unilaterally avoid Blanche. From then on, Blanche used Renato to dig up Tristan's intentions. It was because Tristan frequently met Renato. Okay, let's say what you are saying is right. So what's your relationship with that bastard? Chapter 18. That bastard, I mean the Grand Prince. You two look pretty close today. There's no way we are close. We only first met yesterday, didn't we? Compared to that, your attitude is. For a moment, Maximo raised his voice. His expression became even worse, but unable to say more, he grumbled. Damn it. Maximo took a deep breath, suppressing the anger rising from within, and then exhaled. It wasn't good to get agitated here. Why did you ask to escort the Grand Prince? I made that offer because I was worried that he didn't have a partner to attend the welcome banquet with. It's my job to help the Grand Prince quickly adapt to the Empire. Renato answered with some lies mixed in. Maximo wouldn't be able to directly confirm with Khalid anyway. But you could have just introduced him to a suitable Omega, couldn't you? Despite Renato's answer, Maximo looked somewhat unhappy. Renato looked at him as if he couldn't understand why Maximo kept questioning him. Do you think I'm acquainted with any Omegas? And the Grand Prince is not just a diplomatic ambassador, he is someone holding half the military power of the Khan Kingdom. What would we do if I introduced the wrong person and caused a problem? That, more than anything else, this is what His Majesty the Empress and the Marquis wanted. They both wanted me to become close to the Grand Prince. That was why I made an offer to escort him. I thought it was a good opportunity to get to know each other. Maximo felt a strange sense of incongruity as he heard Renato's rebuttal without losing a single word, and frowned. Was this punk always like this? Maximo looked at Renato with confused eyes. The Renato he knew was absolutely not the kind of person that looked straight into his eyes and countered his words like this. On the contrary, every time they met, he would be busy looking at him with a frightened expression. If they ever made eye contact, he would be startled and avoid his gaze, and with the slightest threat, he would shrink his shoulders and fidget like a puppy wanting to urinate. So what the hell does this mean? His dark magenta-colored eyes sank. Maximo looked at Renato with a hostile gaze as though looking at a stranger. You, just what's wrong with you? Approaching Renato, Maximo growled in a low voice. His fierce gaze reached Renato's face. He felt the will to dig up everything Renato was hiding. What's wrong with me? Renato tried to remain composed and responded as calmly as possible. But contrary to his voice, his body was frozen stiff. His spine shuddered because of the stare that pierced his skin, the nape of his neck becoming stiff. The pain on his scar on the side, which he had felt from the moment he met Maximo, also worsened. You are really strange these days, Maximo murmured, perhaps finding something suspicious. Renato's face became white at his threat and his voice slightly trembled just like usual, but his sharp tone and cold demeanor just kept tickling his nerves. When he thought again, it was even stranger when Renato was with Khalid earlier. Renato didn't seem to be aware of it himself, but Maximo immediately noticed that Renato was very friendly to Khalid. Renato's eyes, expression, attitude, voice, everything was different from when Renato behaved toward him or the Empress. It perhaps felt similar to when he was with that cheeky second prince. That was why he suspected Renato and questioned him. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, but it bothered him that Renato had somehow changed. Be honest, what are you scheming? What are you thinking with that little head? Tap. His long index finger lightly poked the round forehead. In an instant, Renato's body froze. He managed to resist the scream about to come out. It wasn't a big action, but goosebumps rose all over his body. Along with that, the fear that had been etched into every nook and cranny on his body in the past few years revived. The composure he barely maintained was broken when the memories of brutal violence came to his mind. Don't harass people, just go away. Renato involuntarily stuttered. He wanted to pretend he was okay, but his tongue twisted and his voice terribly trembled. Thump thump, the sound of his heartbeat echoed in his body, and his back became wet. Beep beep, tinnitus rang in both of his ears as if warning him to run away. Renato gasped for breath, leaning his back against the wall like a pursued rabbit. His head was dizzy as though the world around him was spinning. It's okay, he can't do anything. Renato took a deep breath to calm down his panic. If he showed a strange appearance now, he would draw people's attention. He had to quickly regain his composure. However, his selfish body did not move as Renato wanted. He was trembling even though he rationally knew Maximo couldn't beat him here since they were in a banquet hall with numerous people. What? Why are you like this? Maximo was remarkably perplexed when Renato gasped and broke into a cold sweat when threatened. The memory of the other day flashed through his mind. The image of Renato, who was startled as if Maximo's hand was a lethal weapon, slapped his hand and fled away. Last time too, just what the hell? Wrinkling his eyebrows, Maximo reached out to Renato with his hand. He wasn't going to let Renato run away like last time. Renato looked at the hand approaching him and took a deep breath. I have to run away. The chaotic violet-colored eyes moved from side to side, looking for a place to escape. He just wanted to get away from Maximo, but there was nowhere to retreat because of the wall behind him. Renato, driven to a dead end, shrank his shoulders as much as possible and tightly closed his eyes. At that time, a low, deep voice saved Renato. You are here, Your Imperial Highness. Feeling the warmth gently clasping his stiff shoulder, Renato quietly opened his eyes. Khalid's figure entered his blurry vision. Your Highness, why is he here? Renato called out to Khalid with a blank face. Khalid slightly pulled Renato towards him instead of answering. Then, as if protecting Renato, he turned his body to block Maximo's face. What is it? Maximo's frown deepened when he saw the sudden appearance of the uninvited guest. Khalid calmly smiled at Maximo, who was staring at him. The dance song started, so I came to find my partner. In any banquet, shouldn't the first dance be performed with one's precious partner? Ah, hearing Khalid's answer, Renato's mind completely returned to reality. As soon as the thick, firm voice wrapped around his ears, the tinnitus that had been bothering him disappeared, and the sounds from his surroundings also returned. As Khalid said, the calm and soft music had turned into an elegant and cheerful dance song. He could also notice the nobles heading toward the center of the banquet hall with their partners. My apologies, I should have accompanied you. This person is Lord Maximo Florence of Florence Duchy. Renato came to his senses and hastily apologized. Then he introduced Khalid to Maximo. He would like to just leave while ignoring Maximo, but it was better to have the two greet each other for the sake of later. My greetings. I am Maximo Florence. I've heard of your reputation, Your Highness. It is a great honor for me to be able to meet the red-eyed slaughterer, who has given the ruthless barbarians a terrible nightmare. Maximo asked for a handshake with a friendly smile as if he had never stared at Khalid. But his eyes were not smiling at all. I am Khalid Nur-Hakan. Pleased to meet you. Since the dance song started, I was in a hurry and made a mistake when interrupting you two's conversation. Not at all. Rather, I should be the one to apologize. And we were just about to end the conversation anyway. I'm glad to hear that. Then, may I take His Imperial Highness with me? Khalid exchanged formal words with Maximo and asked with a relaxed attitude. The form of his sentence was a question, but in fact, it was a notification. Of course. Maximo paused for a moment, then replied one beat later. If it was the usual him, he would have gotten angry with Khalid, who interrupted his conversation with Renato. However, he held himself back for now because the other person was Khalid. Thank you very much for your consideration. I hope we can have a relaxed meeting next time. After finishing the conversation, Khalid lowered the hand holding Renato's shoulder and naturally wrapped it around his waist. Seeing that, Maximo widened his eyes. Regardless of that, Khalid smiled and held out his other hand to Renato. Shall we go, Your Imperial Highness? Ah, yes. Renato glanced at Maximo once, then took Khalid's hand and headed towards the center of the banquet hall. He felt a stinging gaze behind his back, but tried to ignore it. Chapter 19. Perhaps because Khalid was by his side, he didn't think Maximo was going to harm him anymore. His shaking heart, the pain in his waist, and the tremors that engulfed his whole body all subsided in an instant. It was thanks to Khalid. As expected, I need this person. Renato felt he needed Khalid once again. The violet-colored eyes, where fear already disappeared, became filled with intense aspiration. Strength also entered the hand that was holding Khalid's hand. Khalid's gaze then turned to Renato. One of his eyebrows slightly raised when seeing the cheeks that had yet to regain their color. Are you okay? Pardon, your complexion is not good. Turning around and facing Renato, Khalid slowly adjusted his steps to the music. He led Renato quite skillfully. I came forward because I thought you were in a difficult situation. Did I do something wrong? Not long ago, Khalid immediately recognized that the person Renato was talking to was Maximo. It was because he looked almost identical to the appearance described in Nasir's report. So he initially intended to wait for the two of them to finish their conversation. Because he had no reason to interrupt the conversation and cause friction with Maximo. But then, he changed his mind when Renato's complexion changed. He didn't know what Renato was talking about with Maximo, but his expression gradually became worse. After combining the words he could sparsely hear, he could tell that Maximo seemed to be dissatisfied with Renato, who became the protocol officer instead of him. For whatever reason, Maximo pushed Renato quite roughly and threateningly. Just by looking at his eyes and actions, he could see how much the man was disregarding Renato. Khalid stood at a moderate distance and continued to watch the two of them. Then a small commotion broke out between Maximo and Renato. In the end, contrary to his initial decision, he meddled with the two of them. He thought it was better not to step up, but he couldn't help it. The moment he saw Renato's face that was completely drained of color, how he couldn't even breathe properly, and how his body trembled just like an aspen about to fall at any moment, his useless nosiness was activated before rational judgment. Not at all. I was in trouble, so, you really helped me a lot. Thank you very much. You two don't seem to get along well. Khalid's voice became lower. The scene he saw a moment ago made him realize something he never wanted to know. Renato's appearance was characteristic of a person exposed to violence for a long time. Well, that's right, Renato did not deny Khalid's words and smiled bitterly. After all, it was a problem he couldn't hide. Thank you very much once again. Had it not been for your help, I would have had a hard time, Your Highness. Khalid looked at Renato, who thanked him with complicated eyes. Renato and he would see each other frequently for at least the next few months. It might have been different if he hadn't known at all, but since he found out, it's impossible not to care about this. The Emperor, or the Empress. Even if he was a prince disregarded by everyone, as one of the noblest blood in the empire, only those with a higher status could directly abuse Renato. Khalid used the information he had to deduce the culprit who had been abusing Renato. Judging from what he saw today, the Empress seemed to be the most likely one. As such, the Empress and Maximo's actions were not on the same side as Renato's. The two of them did not show even the slightest amount of respect for Renato. He wasn't treated like an equal collaborator, but someone of an obviously lower ranking. He could at least understand a bit how the Empress, who was an elder, did that, but it was beyond common sense that Maximo, a duke's son, could do that as well. The man might be an alpha that the Empress wanted to adopt and a collateral imperial family member with the right of succession to the throne. Nonetheless, right now he was only the son of a duke and had yet to inherit any titles. Such a person was harassing the prince who was a direct imperial family member. Any sane person would say it was nonsense. If Maximo had ever used violence against Renato like what he guessed, it was possible only with the Empress' connivance. When his thoughts reached that point, he felt bitter. It was not that he didn't know the cruelty of power, but he wondered why would a person treat their one and only child that way. Then again, in this fucking world, this kind of tragedy was fully possible. Even at this moment, it was not uncommon for a son to kill his father to become the head of the household, a child who got married for convenience to betray their own family, and siblings to attack each other due to a dispute over succession. Khalid was no different from them. He willingly tainted his hands with blood to put his sister, Mariam, on the throne. Some of the people Khalid killed had the same surname as him. I'm sorry, Khalid. His red eyes darkened as he recalled Mariam, who had apologized to him a few weeks ago. Her voice was filled with regret and guilt. At the same time, there was also a faint sense of relief. I can only continue to cause trouble to you. Forgive your foolish sister. In the last tea time they had before he left for the Empire, Khalid could read the changes in Mariam. Unlike how Mariam was still number one to him, he was no longer number one to her. Seeing the situation turning strange, he had already expected that to some extent, but when checking it with his own eyes, an indescribable bitterness swept over him. That was how power was. As Khalid's reputation increased and more knights started following him, Mariam probably became more anxious as well. After becoming the queen, she had many things to keep compared to before, so she couldn't only live as Khalid's affectionate sister like how she used to. Your Highness, Your Highness. Immersed in bitter thoughts, Khalid blinked at the voice calling out to him. The light purple eyes filled with worry entered his clear vision. Your expression suddenly became bad. When their eyes met, Renato murmured in a small voice. Khalid hurriedly fixed his facial expression when he saw Renato looking at him. It was his inexcusable mistake to fall into other thoughts while dancing. My apologies. I was thinking about something else for a while. Khalid quickly apologized and awkwardly wrinkled his nose. Only then did Renato look relieved. I was worried that I might have offended you, so I'm glad it wasn't the case. Why would I be offended? Khalid smiled more softly on purpose. His past self overlapped with Renato, who was paying excessive attention to other people's expressions. A beta prince who had no rights to the throne, and an illegitimate royal prince adopted by the queen consort who didn't have a son. Their specific circumstances were different from each other, but Renato and Khalid had the same unblessed birth. They were despised by the people around them for their very existence. It suddenly occurred to Khalid that he might have grown up like Renato had he not been loved by his biological mother and met Mariam. Khalid, who suffered all kinds of humiliation for being an illegitimate child, was able to succeed without being twisted because of his biological mother Jamila's unconditional love and Mariam's willingness to accept her half-brother into the family. Even the former queen consort, who had made Khalid a royal prince out of political need, did not give him affection, but still cared for him without lacking in other ways. Thinking like that, he felt like a pretty lucky person. He had already ordered Nasir to re-investigate, but Khalid decided to dig a little deeper regarding Renato's information. He had a hunch that maybe Renato might become a variable in his life in the Empire. Then, Renato suddenly made a proposal. If it's okay with you, after the dance is over, I would like to talk to you alone while avoiding people's eyes. Just the two of us. Yes, this is an essential story for the future. It will be an offer that will never hurt you, Your Highness. What should I do? Feeling the hands on his slightly tremble, Khalid fell into agony. He was a little surprised because he got this offer as soon as he thought Renato was going to be a variable. Besides, his sharp intuition was telling him something. The story Renato wanted to talk about wouldn't be an ordinary conversation. If he made a wrong decision, he wouldn't be able to get out and would be deeply entangled in this, so it would be better to refuse. He should draw a decisive line so that Renato wouldn't think too much. Khalid hesitated. He didn't intend to get entangled in politics in another country, but seeing Renato waiting for his answer with an earnest face, it was strangely difficult for him to refuse. I understand. After thinking for a while, Khalid accepted Renato's offer. He couldn't guess what Renato would be talking about, but he thought it might be okay to just listen. Quote ellipsis ellipsis exclamation mark. Thank you very much. Rejoiced, Renato expressed his gratitude when Khalid gave his permission. Because his tension was relieved, his pale cheeks also regained their color. The corners of his eyes, which were previously filled with tension, folded and curled up, while his adorable lips went up in an arc. Khalid was momentarily captivated because of Renato's smiling face. He had the brightest and most radiant smile he had ever seen. Immediately after that, the dance song ended. First of all, I will go first, and I will send an attendant to guide you, Your Highness. All right. The two walked out of the center of the hall, talking about how to meet while avoiding people's gazes. Then I'll see you later. Looking at Renato's back as he moved in the front, Khalid once again had an ominous foreboding that he would be firmly entangled with this person. No, not yet. If he says something strange, I can just cut it off. Sitting in a corner to keep people from approaching him, Khalid struggled to suppress his anxiety, waiting for Renato to send an attendant. He hoped that his intuition would not be true this time. Chapter 20. Welcome, Your Highness. Renato, who was guarding the balcony alone, welcomed Khalid when he entered with Louis's guidance. Seeing Renato, whose complexion had turned pale again in the chilly night air, Khalid took off his jacket. Please wear it. Pardon. Renato's eyes widened as he reflexively took the jacket. Looking at Renato stiffened in surprise, Khalid let out a small sigh and took his jacket back. Then, he wrapped it around Renato's shoulders. I think you are cold. You don't have to be so considerate. I was the one asking for a conversation. Renato was restless when the warm jacket wrapped around his shoulders. Khalid became frustrated when he saw how Renato was at a loss with just a little kindness. He let out a small sigh and firmly adjusted the jacket's collar. I'm used to the cold, so I'm all right. The Empire's winter is also warm for me. After finishing his words, Khalid took a step back and looked around. Fortunately, he could feel no people nearby. There seems to be no one on the balcony. It's probably because it's winter. Renato fiddled with Khalid's jacket with an awkward expression, then muttered. The banquet hall's balcony was one of the places where nobles enjoyed secret meetings, but it was an exception in the cold winter. Renato had originally planned to go to the lounge that only the imperial family could use. It was a good place to have a quiet conversation with Khalid, as it was a place where only the imperial family and those with permission were allowed to enter. Blanche had returned to the Empress Palace, so there was no one to disturb him. However, due to Maximo's unexpected appearance, he had to change the location. Maximo was one of the people who could freely come and go from the Imperial Lounge with the Empress' permission. Considering what happened a while ago, he felt he should be more careful. So what did you plan to talk about? Khalid slightly leaned against the railing of the balcony and went straight to the point. Whatever Renato was planning to talk about, it would definitely be an uncomfortable talk, so he wanted to end the conversation quickly and return. About that, Renato couldn't answer right away and gulped. He had prepared for this from the moment he decided to get Khalid into his plans. How to bring this up, what words he would use to persuade, and what price to offer. He had pondered over this for days, paid attention to every word, and practiced the lines dozens of times. Just a few minutes ago, while waiting for Khalid to arrive, he completed the final check. But when the time to actually speak to Khalid came, his head became as white as a blank sheet of paper, and his lips couldn't move as if frozen. Is it right to say this now? Renato, unable to make a decision, hesitated. He didn't intend to bring this up in such a hurry. He originally intended to make a cautious suggestion to Khalid once he got to know him better and they became closer. But because of Maximo, he felt the need to rush. Be honest. What are you scheming? What are you thinking with that little head? Maximo was aware of Renato's changes that Blanche and Marquis Metis had not noticed. The man didn't know the exact situation, but he seemed to feel something strange. Renato felt a deep sense of crisis. Since Maximo had raised his suspicions, Renato did not know when the man would interfere in this. What if Maximo said to Blanche and Marquis Metis that he suspected Renato? There was a high possibility that things would go awry. If he made a mistake, he perhaps would have to resign from his position as the protocol officer tomorrow. It wouldn't be easy to meet Khalid then, so Renato nervously bit his lower lip with his upper teeth. He had to say it now. Your Imperial Highness, Khalid called Renato with a puzzled look on his face when Renato's expression became worse. Renato's face lit up in the dazzling moonlight, looked as pale as a corpse, making him suddenly feel anxious. Are you perhaps feeling sick anywhere? Your Highness, Grand Prince Khalid. Finally making up his mind, Renato interrupted Khalid's words and met his gaze. When Renato's mood changed, Khalid quietly closed his mouth and waited for his next words. To Khalid Nur Hakan, the Grand Prince of the Khan Kingdom and commander of the Black Wolf Knights. The breath resembling frost scattered in the air, and a soft, trembling voice echoed from his small lips. Renato grabbed the hem of his clothes so tightly that the jacket wrapped around him was also crumpled. Renato El Fleuret, Prince of the Fleuret Empire and descendant of the Fairy King, asks with all my heart. Renato raised his head and said out loud the words he had prepared for a long time. Contrary to the still trembling voice, the eyes reminiscent of violets did not waver. Please marry me. Excuse me, what did he just say? Khalid's eyes widened when hearing the unexpected proposal. His mouth opened as wide as his enlarged eyes. A shock as if someone had hit the back of his head with a scabbard struck him. Please wait a minute. So, if I'm not hearing it wrong, did you just propose to me? Khalid, immensely bewildered, asked back because he could not believe what he had heard. It was an absurd thing to say. They had only met twice, but he suddenly received a marriage proposal out of the blue. It was something beyond Khalid's understanding capacity. He felt a strong headache rushing in. He didn't drink much, but his head was dizzy as if he was drunk. Thinking that it couldn't be true, Khalid wished that Renato would deny the proposal just now. Then he could dismiss it as something he had heard wrong and move on. However, Renato did not listen to Khalid's wish. Rather, he calmly added an explanation and confirmed the kill. Yes, to be precise, I want to make a contract with you through marriage, Your Highness. A contract? Do you want to make a deal with me? What you think is right. 3 years, please be my companion for just that time. I will pay the price without regret. Ha! The more he listened, the more absurd it was. Khalid laughed in astonishment. His previous surprise had vanished and obvious anger appeared on his face. He had guessed it wasn't a simple matter, but he never dreamed that Renato would propose a contract marriage. Why me? Khalid asked without hiding his disappointed expression. He felt pity for himself who had felt sorry for Renato until a while ago. Because you are the right person, Your Highness. Renato answered with a confident attitude. Seeing Renato's attitude that seemed as though he was waiting for that question, Khalid became even more confused. He couldn't figure out why Renato was so sure. Do you think you know me well? It's not that I don't know at all. I'm sure that I know at least enough to propose to you, Your Highness. I think we just met for the first time yesterday. Isn't it too short of a time to say that you know me? Because you are famous, unlike me, Your Highness. Renato made an expression saying that Khalid just asked something obvious. Khalid was already a famous knight on the continent. Over the past few years, he had been on numerous battlefields, winning all of them without a single defeat. Khalid was feared by the so-called barbarians, the desert tribe, and the mountain tribe. Out of fear, they called Khalid, the knight who brings death, the undefeatable Black Wolf, and the red-eyed slaughterer. Anyone who followed the path of the sword, as well as anyone with any interest in international affairs, could not be unaware of Khalid. That was how powerful he was. For my purpose, I need your power, Your Highness. In return, I will give you what you want. You speak like you know what I want. An ice-free port for trade in winter, a plane for a stable food supply, and a position where you can solve problems with the current queen, Her Majesty Mariam, and ease the political burden on you. Khalid's gaze stiffened when hearing Renato's relentless words. What came out of those small, plump lips was long-standing troubles for the Khan kingdom. In addition, the last thing he added was a concern that would never be known unless it was someone close to him like Nasir. I think this is enough for you to show interest, am I wrong? You seem to have done a thorough investigation on me. Khalid's voice clearly dropped. It was impossible to deny what Renato had said because they were all correct. How did he know? Khalid looked at Renato with a suspicious gaze. It may simply be that the Empire's intelligence was excellent, but even so, he did not think that the prince in front of him would know anything close to confidentiality. He even doubted that maybe the Emperor or the Empress had informed him about that. The first two cases could possibly be obtained by those who were well versed in international affairs, but the last one was information that was difficult to be obtained even for high-ranking officials of the Empire. For even in the kingdom, very few people knew that Khalid and Mariam's relationship was no longer what it used to be.